George Washington. George Washington, born on February 22nd, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, stands as a towering figure in American history. His early life was shaped by the Virginia gentry, with his father, Augustine Washington, being a prosperous planter. After his father's death in 1743, young George became the ward of his half-brother, Lawrence Washington, who introduced him to the world of land surveying and the military. By the age of 16, Washington had begun his career as a surveyor, a profession that took him across the rugged terrains of Virginia and provided him with a deep understanding of the land and its people. This early exposure to the frontier's challenges and opportunities would later inform his leadership during the Revolutionary War. Washington's military career commenced in earnest during the French and Indian War, where he served with distinction. His experiences in this conflict honed his leadership skills and exposed him to the complexities of colonial and British military operations. Despite facing setbacks, including the infamous defeat at Fort Necessity, Washington's resilience and tactical acumen earned him respect. These formative experiences laid the groundwork for his future role as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. In 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow, which significantly increased his social standing and wealth. The couple settled at Mount Vernon, Washington's plantation along the Potomac River. There, he managed extensive agricultural operations and became a prominent figure in Virginia's colonial society. However, the growing tensions between the American colonies and the British Crown soon drew Washington back into public service. As the colonies moved toward rebellion, Washington emerged as a leading advocate for colonial rights. His reputation and leadership qualities led to his unanimous appointment as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army in 1775. Over the next 8 years, Washington led the fledgling American forces through the trials of war, facing a better-equipped British army. His strategic retreats, surprise attacks, and unwavering commitment to the cause were instrumental in sustaining the revolutionary effort. The victory at Yorktown in 1781, achieved with the aid of French forces, marked the culmination of his military leadership and the beginning of American independence. Following the war, Washington's voluntary resignation as commander-in-chief in 1783 was a profound act of statesmanship. By relinquishing power, he set a precedent for civilian control of the military and demonstrated his commitment to Republican ideals. Returning to Mount Vernon, he hoped to enjoy a peaceful retirement. However, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and the need for a stronger federal government soon drew him back into the political arena. In 1787, Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, lending his considerable influence to the drafting of the United States Constitution. His support was crucial in the ratification process, helping to unify the fledgling nation under a new framework of government. When the first presidential election was held in 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the nation's first president, a testament to his unparalleled stature and the trust he commanded. As president, Washington faced the monumental task of establishing the functions and precedents of the executive branch. He appointed a diverse and talented cabinet, including Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. Washington's leadership during this formative period helped to solidify the federal government's authority and legitimacy. He navigated challenges such as the Whiskey Rebellion, asserting federal power while maintaining civil order. His commitment to neutrality in foreign affairs, particularly during the conflicts between Britain and France, set a lasting precedent in American foreign policy. After serving 2 terms, Washington declined to seek a third, reinforcing the principle of peaceful transitions of power. In his farewell address, he warned against the dangers of political factions and entangling foreign alliances, advice that would resonate throughout American history. Retiring once more to Mount Vernon, he spent his final years overseeing his estate and engaging in agricultural pursuits. Washington passed away on December 14, 1799, leaving behind a legacy as the father of his country. His leadership, character, and vision were instrumental in shaping the United States, and his example continues to inspire generations. John Adams. John Adams, the second president of the United States, was a man whose influence on American history is often overshadowed by the more iconic founding fathers like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Yet his contributions to the birth of a nation were monumental, his convictions unshakable, and his life story both inspiring and complex. Born on October 30th, 1735, in Braintree, Massachusetts, which is now known as Quincy, Adams came from humble beginnings. His father was a farmer and a deacon, and he instilled in young John the values of hard work, education, and moral integrity. Adams would grow up to become not just a key figure in the American Revolution, but a relentless advocate for independence, a brilliant legal mind, and a deeply committed public servant. His journey from a modest New England upbringing to the presidency is a tale of intellect, determination, and, at times, painful sacrifice. Adams attended Harvard College at the age of 16, and although he initially considered becoming a minister, he ultimately chose the law. The rigor of legal study and the sharp edges of courtroom debate seemed to suit his personality far more than the pulpit. He was passionate about justice and truth, and even in his early career, Adams showed signs of the tenacity that would come to define his role in American history. His legal practice in Boston flourished, and he quickly became known for his eloquence and fierce independence. One of the most defining moments of his early career came in 1770, after the Boston Massacre, when he made the controversial decision to defend the British soldiers who had fired into a crowd of colonists. Though many patriots called for blood, Adams insisted on the importance of the rule of law and a fair trial. His defense resulted in acquittals for most of the soldiers, and though it temporarily damaged his popularity, it earned him immense respect for putting principle above popularity. As tensions between the colonies and Britain escalated, Adams' political involvement deepened. He was elected to the Massachusetts legislature and soon became a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congresses. There, he emerged as one of the most vocal proponents of independence. His fiery speeches, sharp intellect, and deep understanding of Enlightenment ideals made him a leader among revolutionaries. It was Adams who nominated George Washington to command the Continental Army. It was Adams who tirelessly pushed for the vote for independence in 1776. And while Thomas Jefferson authored the Declaration of Independence, it was Adams who defended it, argued for it, and made sure it passed through the Continental Congress. He was not just a voice in the room, he was a driving force behind the birth of the United States. Adams's service to the country didn't end there. During the Revolutionary War, he served as a diplomat, representing the United States in Europe. He faced countless hardships, navigating complex political waters in France, the Netherlands, and Britain, all while trying to secure financial and military support for the fledgling nation. His diplomatic efforts were crucial in securing Dutch recognition and loans, and later in negotiating the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the war and recognized American independence. These years abroad were exhausting and often lonely, but Adams remained steadfast in his mission. His letters to his wife Abigail during this period reveal a man torn between duty to his country and devotion to his family. Abigail Adams, his confidant, advisor, and intellectual equal, was a remarkable woman in her own right. Their correspondence remains one of the most touching and insightful exchanges between two partners in American history, offering a unique window into the heart and mind of John Adams. When Adams returned to the United States, he served as the first vice president under George Washington. He famously described the vice presidency as the most insignificant office that ever French, the invention of man, contrived, a reflection of the frustration he felt at being sidelined in Washington's administration. Yet he remained loyal and fulfilled his duties with diligence. His election to the presidency in 1796 marked the first peaceful transfer of power in American history, a testament to the strength of the country's democratic foundations. As president, Adams faced a nation still trying to define itself. Political factions were emerging, with Federalists and Democratic Republicans at odds over the direction of the country. Adams, a Federalist, believed in a strong central government and feared the chaos of mob rule, but he also distrusted monarchy and aristocracy. His vision for America was one of balance between liberty and order, independence and unity. His presidency was dominated by foreign policy challenges, particularly tensions with France. The infamous XYZ affair, in which French agents demanded bribes from American diplomats, enraged the public and nearly led to war. Adams resisted the popular call for armed conflict and instead sought a peaceful resolution, eventually sending a new diplomatic mission that succeeded in easing tensions. His decision not to go to war was courageous, especially in the face of immense political pressure and public outrage. It likely cost him re-election, but Adams believed that avoiding war was the right course for the young nation. This episode is one of the most telling examples of his integrity and willingness to sacrifice political gain for the national good. Domestically, his presidency was marked by controversy over the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were passed under his administration. These laws, which allowed the government to detain and deport non-citizens and made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government, were widely criticized as violations of free speech and civil liberties. Though Adams did not initiate the acts, he signed them into law, a decision that tarnished his legacy and fueled opposition from the Democratic Republicans. These acts became a rallying point for Jefferson and his allies, contributing significantly to Adams' defeat in the election of 1800. The election of 1800 was a bitter and divisive contest between Adams and his former friend Thomas Jefferson. The two men, once allies in the fight for independence, had grown apart both personally and politically. Their ideological differences played out on a national stage, and the campaign was marred by personal attacks and partisan rancor. Jefferson ultimately won the election, and Adams, in a final act of statesmanship, left the Capitol quietly on the morning of Jefferson's inauguration. It was a peaceful transition of power, a moment that reinforced the durability of the American experiment in self-government. After his presidency, Adams retired to his farm in Quincy, where he lived for more than 2 decades. In his later years, he reflected deeply on the Revolution, the Constitution, and the state of the country he had helped create. He resumed correspondence with Jefferson after years of silence, and their letters, filled with philosophical musing, personal anecdotes, and reflections on their shared legacy, are among the most profound exchanges in American political thought. Adams lived to see his son, John Quincy Adams, elected as the 6th President of the United States, a rare and remarkable accomplishment in American history. On July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, John Adams died at the age of 90. His final words were reportedly, "Thomas Jefferson survives," unaware that Jefferson had died just hours earlier. The coincidence of their deaths on the same day, 2 old patriots, 2 architects of American liberty, passing on the golden anniversary of the nation they helped build, is a poetic coda to a remarkable life. John Adams was a complex man, brilliant, stubborn, principled, and sometimes abrasive. He was a fierce advocate for the rule of law and a visionary who saw the potential of a free republic long before it was a reality. He believed in education, in civic responsibility, and in the idea that government should serve the people, not rule them. His writings, speeches, and letters reveal a man deeply committed to truth and virtue, even when it came at a personal or political cost. He was never the most charismatic figure of the founding generation, but he may have been the most intellectually honest and morally driven. In many ways, Adams was a paradox. He defended British soldiers, yet led the charge for independence. He believed in strong government, but feared tyranny. He craved recognition, but was often content to do what was right, rather than what was popular. He was not a man of half measures. His convictions ran deep, and he acted on them with courage and consistency. While others sought glory or compromise, Adams often chose the harder path, the principled path, and history has come to recognize him for that. His legacy endures not just in the documents he helped create or the offices he held, but in the example he set as a public servant devoted to the ideals of liberty, justice, and truth. The United States owes much to John Adams, not just for what he did, but for who he was. A man of letters, of law, and of leadership, he was one of the original architects of American democracy. His life reminds us that nation building is not the work of a single moment, but of enduring dedication, informed debate, and the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. As we look back on the founding era, it is easy to focus on the myths and monuments. But the real story of the American Revolution and of the early republic lies in the lives of men like John Adams. He was not perfect. He made mistakes, he had enemies, and he often struggled with the political winds of his time. But he never lost sight of the goal: to build a free, just, and enduring nation. He fought not for fame or fortune, but for a future he believed in, a future built on the principles of liberty, equality, and the rule of law. In a world that often rewards flash over substance, the life of John Adams stands as a powerful reminder of the enduring value of integrity, intellect, and unyielding commitment to the common good. His voice, preserved in countless letters and essays, still speaks to us across the centuries, urging us to think deeply, act justly, and never take freedom for granted. As the second president of the United States and one of the most important founding fathers, John Adams earned his place in history not by seeking power, but by serving a purpose greater than himself. His story is not just a chapter in American history, it is one of its foundations. Thomas Jefferson stands as one of the most complex, brilliant, and paradoxical figures in American history. A man of enlightenment and contradiction, Jefferson wore many hats: statesman, philosopher, inventor, architect, scientist, and third president of the United States. His life story reads like a tapestry woven with idealism and realism, vision and compromise, principle and pragmatism. Born on April 13, 1743 in Shadwell, Virginia, Jefferson was the third of 10 children born to Peter Jefferson, a surveyor and planter, and Jane Randolph, a member of one of the most prominent families in Virginia. He grew up in the gentle countryside of colonial Virginia, where he received a classical education and developed an early fascination with the natural world, music, and languages. At the age of 16, Jefferson entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, where he quickly distinguished himself through his voracious reading and deep intellect. Under the guidance of mentors like George Wythe, he delved into law, philosophy, and the classics, developing the foundations of the Enlightenment thinking that would shape his future political ideology. By his early 20s, Jefferson had already begun to formulate a vision of liberty and self-governance that was both radical and deeply rooted in the philosophical traditions of Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. After becoming a lawyer and entering the Virginia House of Burgesses, he soon emerged as a powerful writer and thinker, even if he was not a particularly gifted public speaker. Jefferson's role in the American Revolution was both pivotal and symbolic. While others took up arms or led troops into battle, Jefferson wielded his pen as his weapon. In 1776, at just 33 years old, he was chosen to draft the Declaration of Independence. This document would not only signal the birth of a new nation, but what would also become one of the most enduring statements of human rights in history. With the famous words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," Jefferson ignited the moral foundation of the United States. Yet even in that moment of high idealism, the contradiction of his own life was apparent. Jefferson, a slave owner, penned a Declaration of Equality while holding hundreds of people in bondage. That dichotomy would follow him throughout his life, casting shadows over his achievements and complicating his legacy. During the years following independence, Jefferson continued to serve the fledgling nation. He was appointed as minister to France, where he witnessed the early stages of the French Revolution and absorbed even more of the Enlightenment thinking that so profoundly influenced his worldview. In France, he formed close relationships with key European figures and further refined his belief in individual rights and limited government. Returning to America, he served as the first Secretary of State under President George Washington. It was during this time that the ideological rift between Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became pronounced. Jefferson championed a vision of America as a nation of independent farmers and small government, while Hamilton pushed for a strong central government and industrialized economy. This clash birthed the first political parties in the United States, Jefferson's Democratic Republicans and Hamilton's Federalists. In 1796, Jefferson lost the presidential election to John Adams, but became vice president under the rules of the Electoral College at the time. 4 years later, he ran again, and this time defeated Adams in a bitter and deeply partisan election, becoming the third president of the United States in 1801. His inauguration marked what he famously called the Revolution of 1800, a peaceful transfer of power between rival political factions, a moment that would help solidify the young nation's democratic foundations. As president, Jefferson sought to limit the power of the federal government and reduce the national debt. He slashed military expenditures, cut taxes, and sought to uphold what he saw as the Republic's agrarian values. His ideal America was a land of independent yeoman farmers, self-reliant and virtuous, free from the corruption of big cities and large institutions. Yet again, Jefferson's presidency was marked by contradictions. In 1803, he authorized the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the United States. While the acquisition was undoubtedly a triumph that secured vast resources and territory, it also challenged his strict constructionist interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution did not explicitly grant the federal government the power to acquire new land, and yet Jefferson made the purchase without an amendment. It was a pragmatic decision, and one that illustrated Jefferson's willingness to bend his principles when political and national interests aligned. Similarly, his handling of foreign affairs, particularly the Embargo Act of 1807, which halted all American exports, was widely criticized and damaged the economy, especially in the commercial Northeast. Despite the political challenges, Jefferson retired from the presidency in 1809, handing the reins to his friend and protege, James Madison. He returned to his beloved Monticello, a mountaintop estate that he had designed and redesigned for decades. Monticello was more than a home. It was a laboratory for Jefferson's endless curiosity. There, he pursued his interests in agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and invention. He devised innovative gadgets, improved plows, and even created a rotating book stand that allowed him to read multiple books at once. But Monticello was also a plantation, and its operation depended on the labor of enslaved people. Jefferson owned more than 600 slaves over his lifetime, and while he occasionally expressed misgivings about the institution of slavery, he never took meaningful action to dismantle it in practice. His failure to reconcile his ideals of liberty with the reality of slavery remains one of the most troubling aspects of his legacy. In his later years, Jefferson continued to be active in public affairs, most notably founding the University of Virginia in 1819. He designed the campus, recruited faculty, and shaped the curriculum, envisioning the university as a secular institution dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and free inquiry. It was the embodiment of his belief in the power of education to sustain a free society. Jefferson considered this accomplishment so important that he had it inscribed on his tombstone, along with his authorship of the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Interestingly, he did not mention his presidency, underscoring how he saw his legacy in terms of ideas and institutions rather than political power. Jefferson's correspondence in his final years reveals a man still deeply engaged with the world. He exchanged letters with many of the era's great thinkers, including his old rival, John Adams. Their renewed friendship, conducted almost entirely through letters, is one of the most poignant narratives of early American history, a testimony to reconciliation, mutual respect, and shared ideals. Both men died on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's death marked the end of an era, but also the solidification of his place in the American pantheon. The legacy of Thomas Jefferson is both luminous and deeply complicated. He was a man of immense talent and vision, whose words helped give birth to a nation and whose actions helped shape its path. He articulated ideals of freedom, equality, and self-government that continue to inspire people around the world. Yet he also failed to confront the injustices that lived within his own home and society. His ownership of slaves, his treatment of Native Americans, and his occasional political inconsistencies have prompted historians and citizens alike to reassess his role in American history. Still, Jefferson's influence remains undeniable. The institutions he founded, the documents he wrote, and the ideas he championed have left an indelible mark on the United States. As a man, Jefferson was a bundle of contradictions, a visionary who could not fully escape the prejudices of his time, a champion of liberty who denied liberty to others, a man of science who clung to certain outdated theories, and a leader who often preferred retreating into his books over the noise of politics. But perhaps it is in that complexity that his humanity is most clearly revealed. He was not a perfect man, nor a flawless leader, but he was a thinker of immense consequence whose dreams helped shape the American experiment. To understand Jefferson is to grapple with the full scope of American ideals, their promise and their imperfections. He reminds us that democracy is a living thing, shaped not just by grand declarations, but by the difficult work of aligning action with principle. His life invites both admiration and critique, both reverence and reflection. And in that sense, Thomas Jefferson continues to live on, not just in statues and textbooks, but in the ongoing American conversation about who we are, who we aspire to be, and how we reconcile the distance between the two. James Madison. James Madison, often referred to as the father of the Constitution, stands as one of the most influential figures in American history. His legacy is deeply interwoven with the creation of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the foundations of the American political system. Yet, Madison was far more than just a political theorist. He was a quiet revolutionary, a strategic thinker, a dedicated public servant, and a man whose intellect helped shape the course of a nation. Born on March 16, 1751, in Port Conway, Virginia, Madison was the oldest of 12 children in a wealthy plantation family. Despite being physically small and often in frail health, Madison developed a formidable mind early on, attending the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University, where he immersed himself in the study of history, government, and philosophy. It was there that Madison first began to grasp the magnitude of governance and political theory, studying thinkers like Locke and Montesquieu, whose ideas would later influence his own political contributions. Madison's early career in politics began in Virginia, where he became involved in the state legislature and served on the Virginia Council of State. During this time, he forged a close relationship with Thomas Jefferson, with whom he would maintain a lifelong friendship and political partnership. Madison's reputation as a thoughtful and skilled legislator quickly grew, and he was soon appointed to the Continental Congress in 1780. As a delegate, he was disheartened by the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, which had created a loose and ineffective union of states with little central authority. This experience deeply influenced Madison's belief that a stronger national government was essential for the survival and success of the United States. He was not alone in this view, but he was among the most articulate and persuasive advocates for reform. When the Constitutional Convention convened in Philadelphia in 1787, Madison arrived with a plan. Known as the Virginia Plan, this blueprint proposed a new structure for the federal government, one with a strong central authority and a system of checks and balances among three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Though the final Constitution would be a compromise among many competing interests, Madison's ideas were foundational. He played a leading role in the debates, taking meticulous notes that provide the most comprehensive record of the proceedings. More than just a scribe, Madison was an active participant, tirelessly arguing for a system that would balance the power of the majority with protections for minority rights. His vision was not just legal or institutional. It was philosophical, rooted in the belief that liberty and order could coexist through well-constructed governance. After the Constitution was drafted, it still needed to be ratified by the states, and this was by no means guaranteed. Many Americans feared the new federal government would be too powerful, repeating the tyranny they had fought to escape. To address these concerns, Madison joined forces with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. Madison authored 29 of these essays, including some of the most important and enduring arguments for constitutional government. In Federalist number 10, Madison tackled the issue of factions, arguing that a large republic would be the best defense against the tyranny of the majority. In Federalist number 51, he famously wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." emphasizing the need for checks and balances within the government to guard against corruption and abuse of power. These essays remain essential reading for anyone seeking to understand American democracy and the philosophical underpinnings of the Constitution. Despite his deep commitment to the new Constitution, Madison recognized the need for additional safeguards to ensure its acceptance. Many states demanded a Bill of Rights as a condition for ratification, fearing that the absence of explicit protections for individual liberties could lead to governmental overreach. Madison initially believed the Constitution as written sufficiently limited government power, but he eventually came to see the wisdom of including a Bill of Rights, not just as a political necessity, but as a moral one. Once elected to the first U.S. House of Representatives, Madison took it upon himself to draft what would become the Bill of Rights. Drawing from a wide range of sources, including state constitutions and earlier political documents, Madison proposed a series of amendments designed to protect freedoms such as speech, religion, assembly, and the right to a fair trial. 10 of these amendments were ratified in 1791, and they have become a cornerstone of American law and identity. As Madison continued his political career, his views evolved in response to the challenges of governance. While he had once aligned closely with Federalists like Hamilton in support of a strong central government, he gradually grew wary of their policies, particularly their emphasis on a powerful executive and their support for a national bank. Madison, along with Jefferson, began to champion the rights of states and a more limited federal government, helping to form the Democratic Republican Party. This new party stood in opposition to the Federalist vision and advocated for a more agrarian, decentralized republic. Madison's political shift demonstrates his pragmatism and willingness to adapt his principles to new realities, rather than rigidly adhering to ideology. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States, and Madison served as his Secretary of State. During this time, Madison played a key role in major events, including the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States and dramatically expanded its potential. As Secretary of State, Madison also dealt with growing tensions with European powers, particularly Britain and France, who were at war and frequently violated American neutrality by interfering with its ships and trade routes. These international pressures would intensify during Madison's own presidency, which began in 1809 following Jefferson's retirement. As the fourth president of the United States, Madison faced an increasingly hostile relationship with Britain, culminating in the War of 1812. Though reluctant to go to war, Madison ultimately asked Congress for a declaration of war, citing British violations of American sovereignty, including the impressment of American sailors and restrictions on trade. The War of 1812 was a difficult and often unpopular conflict marked by military setbacks and internal divisions. The British even managed to invade Washington, D.C., burning the White House and the Capitol. Yet despite these challenges, Madison remained resolute, and American forces eventually secured important victories, including the Battle of New Orleans. While the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the war, restored the status quo rather than resolving the underlying issues, the war fostered a new sense of national unity and identity, often referred to as the era of good feelings. Madison's leadership during the war demonstrated his resilience and commitment to the nation's independence and integrity. Though he had once been skeptical of a strong military and centralized institutions, he came to understand their necessity in preserving the republic. After 2 terms as president, Madison retired from public life in 1817, returning to his estate at Montpelier in Virginia. But he did not retreat entirely from public discourse. Madison continued to correspond with political leaders, offer advice, and reflect on the meaning of the Constitution and the challenges of democratic governance. In his later years, Madison became increasingly concerned with the issue of slavery, an institution that had shaped much of Southern life, including his own. Though he had been a slave owner for most of his life, he supported gradual emancipation and the colonization movement, which sought to resettle freed slaves in Africa. However, like many of his contemporaries, Madison struggled to reconcile his ideals of liberty and equality with the economic and social realities of slavery. His position reflects the contradictions at the heart of the early republic, where revolutionary ideals often coexisted uneasily with entrenched injustice. James Madison died on June 28, 1836, at the age of 85. By then, he had lived to see the country he helped create grow and evolve in ways he could never have fully anticipated. His contributions to American political thought remain profound and enduring. Madison's belief in reasoned debate, constitutional structure, and the delicate balance between liberty and order continue to guide the United States through its ongoing democratic experiment. He understood that the Constitution was not a perfect document, but rather a living framework meant to adapt and endure. In many ways, Madison's genius lay in his ability to anticipate future challenges and build mechanisms to meet them, principles that remain as relevant today as they were in his own time. Though often overshadowed by more charismatic figures like Washington and Jefferson, Madison's influence is arguably more deeply embedded in the nation's political DNA. His meticulous attention to detail, his commitment to principle, and his tireless efforts to build consensus made him a rare figure in American politics, one who preferred the substance of policy to the theater of power. He was a man of modest demeanor but immense consequence. He avoided the trappings of fame and sought no cult of personality, yet his legacy is foundational. Every time Americans invoke their rights to free speech, a fair trial, or religious liberty, they are living in the shadow of Madison's vision. Even now, more than 2 centuries after his death, Madison's insights into human nature, governance, and the need for institutional checks continue to resonate. He understood the fragility of democracy and the vigilance required to sustain it. He warned against factionalism, excessive power, and complacency, and he offered tools through law, structure, and civic virtue to guard against them. Madison saw government not as a tool of domination, but as a means of safeguarding freedom. He believed that with careful design and wise stewardship, a free people could govern themselves responsibly and justly. And while America has faced its share of trials and contradictions, Madison's framework has proven remarkably durable. In remembering James Madison, we don't just honor a founding father. We reconnect with the essential questions of self-government and civic responsibility. We are reminded that liberty is not a given, but a constant negotiation between freedom and order, between individual rights and collective good. Madison's life teaches us that the health of a democracy depends not only on its institutions, but on the character and wisdom of its citizens. His was a life devoted to public service, to intellectual rigor, and to the belief that a better future could be forged through reason, compromise, and vision. As we look to the challenges of our own time, we would do well to remember the quiet, brilliant architect of American democracy, James Madison, and the legacy he left not only in ink and parchment, but in the living, breathing experiment that is the United States of America. James Monroe. James Monroe, the 5th President of the United States, was a figure shaped by revolution, defined by diplomacy, and remembered most famously for a doctrine that still resonates through American foreign policy today. Born on April 28, 1758, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, Monroe's early years were steeped in the tensions and aspirations of the American colonies. Growing up in a time when the idea of independence was becoming more than a whisper, Monroe would soon find himself a central participant in the forging of a new nation. He attended the College of William and Mary, but left in 1776 to join the Continental Army, serving under General George Washington. It was on Christmas night, 1776, that Monroe took part in the daring and iconic crossing of the Delaware River. He was wounded in the ensuing Battle of Trenton, a musket ball to the shoulder, but survived, marking the beginning of a long and storied public career. As the war ended and the United States looked to shape its new government, Monroe transitioned from soldier to statesman. He studied law under Thomas Jefferson, whose mentorship would deeply influence his views. Monroe entered politics as a delegate to the Continental Congress in 1783 and soon became a United States Senator from Virginia in 1790. At this time, the nation was still in its infancy, grappling with the structure and limits of federal power. Monroe aligned with the Democratic Republican Party, favoring states' rights and a limited central government. His early career was defined by a deep belief in the principles of the Revolution, and he carried that idealism into his roles as a diplomat abroad. In the 1790s, he was appointed minister to France by President Washington, a post that placed him in the heart of revolutionary Paris. Though sympathetic to the French Revolution, his support would later cause friction with the Washington administration, leading to his recall. Despite the setback, Monroe's commitment to public service never wavered. He returned to the U.S. and was twice elected governor of Virginia, where he oversaw important reforms and the state militia. His executive experience at the state level solidified his reputation as a capable and pragmatic leader. By the time Thomas Jefferson became president, Monroe was again called into diplomatic service, this time with monumental implications. In 1803, Monroe, along with Robert Livingston, helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase, one of the most significant land deals in history. For $15 million, the United States doubled in size, acquiring territory from France that extended from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. This acquisition not only expanded the nation's borders, but also symbolized the growing ambition and reach of the young republic. Monroe's role in securing the deal showcased his diplomatic skill and his enduring commitment to American expansion. Over the following years, Monroe served in several high-profile roles, including Secretary of State and Secretary of War under President James Madison. During the War of 1812, Monroe's leadership became even more essential. The conflict tested the nation's resilience and exposed weaknesses in its defense. Monroe stepped in to stabilize the situation and maintain national morale. His dual role in Madison's cabinet, a rarity in U.S. state history, demonstrated his adaptability and trustworthiness. As Secretary of State, he was instrumental in negotiating peace and steering the country through the aftermath of the war. When Madison's presidency concluded, Monroe emerged as the clear successor. In 1816, he was elected President of the United States in a landslide, ushering in what became known as the Era of Good Feelings. Monroe's presidency, spanning 2 terms from 1817 to 1825, is often remembered as a time of relative political harmony and national unity. The Federalist Party had all but dissolved, leaving the Democratic-Republican Party as the dominant political force. With fewer partisan battles in Congress, Monroe had an opportunity to focus on domestic growth, national defense, and westward expansion. He undertook a goodwill tour of the country, visiting nearly every state, which helped bolster national pride and connected the federal government more directly with the people. Yet, beneath the surface of unity, challenges loomed. The question of slavery was beginning to rise again in national politics. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise was passed, allowing Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state, while Maine entered as a free state. The legislation also drew a line across the former Louisiana Territory, establishing boundaries for future slave and free states. Monroe signed the bill into law, believing it would maintain the fragile balance between North and South. Though a temporary fix, it postponed the sectional conflict that would eventually erupt into civil war. Monroe's foreign policy achievements were equally significant. Working closely with his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, Monroe sought to affirm American independence, not just from Britain, but from European interference altogether. This culminated in the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, his most enduring legacy. In his annual message to Congress, Monroe declared that the Western Hemisphere was no longer open to European colonization. He warned European powers not to interfere in the affairs of the Americas, framing any such action as a threat to U.S. peace and security. In return, the United States would remain neutral in European wars. Though the doctrine lacked military enforcement at the time, it laid the ideological groundwork for future American foreign policy and was invoked repeatedly in the centuries to come. It asserted the United States' growing confidence and its self-appointed role as a guardian of the Western Hemisphere. Throughout his presidency, Monroe maintained a reputation for honesty, humility, and quiet strength. He dressed simply, lived modestly, and believed deeply in civic virtue. Unlike the fiery personalities of some of his contemporaries, Monroe was not known for grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Instead, he was a steady hand, reliable, principled, and respected. His ability to work with diverse political figures and his commitment to the ideals of the Revolution helped keep the country unified during a formative time. By the time he left office in 1825, Monroe had presided over a nation that was growing rapidly in both territory and ambition. The foundations of modern America, its democratic institutions, its continental scope, and its independent foreign policy had all been strengthened under his watch. Monroe's post-presidency years were marked by financial hardship, a common fate among early American presidents who did not receive pensions. He retired to Virginia, but was eventually forced to move to New York to live with his daughter due to mounting debts. Despite his struggles, Monroe remained proud of his service and committed to the ideals he had long defended. On July 4th, 1831, exactly 5 years after the deaths of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe died at the age of 73. His passing on Independence Day symbolized his deep connection to the American founding. He was the last president of the Revolutionary generation, the last of the Founding Fathers to serve in the nation's highest office. Looking back, Monroe's contributions to the United States were both foundational and forward-looking. He helped guide the country through early crises, expanded its territory, and articulated a vision of sovereignty that would influence generations of leaders. The Monroe Doctrine, in particular, remains one of the clearest declarations of American intent in global affairs. Its language of non-intervention and hemispheric autonomy became a touchstone for presidents from Theodore Roosevelt to John F. Kennedy and even into the modern day. Yet Monroe himself was not a man driven by personal glory or power. His presidency lacked the high drama of some others, but it was during his administration that the United States began to truly believe in its national potential. He governed with integrity and a sense of purpose, always aiming to preserve the Union and promote its prosperity. His background as a soldier, a diplomat, a governor, and a cabinet member gave him a uniquely well-rounded perspective. He had seen war and peace, division and unity, domestic struggle and international diplomacy. He was not a brilliant orator like some, nor a visionary theorist like others, but Monroe had what every great leader needs: judgment, humility, and resolve. He had earned the trust of the people, not through spectacle, but through service, and that trust allowed him to lead during one of the most optimistic yet delicate chapters in American history. Today, Monroe's name lives on not just through his doctrine, but in the capital cities, counties, schools, and streets named in his honor across the nation. His face once appeared on U.S. currency, and his legacy is etched into the narrative of American growth. The America he left behind was vastly different from the fragile republic he helped build as a young soldier. It was a continent-spanning power with expanding commerce, growing cities, and a deepening sense of national identity. Though it still faced profound challenges, especially over slavery and states' rights, Monroe helped keep the nation on a path toward unity and strength. In the end, James Monroe's greatest achievement might not be found in any single speech or event, but in the steady, confident way he held the Republic together during a time of change. He was a builder, a guardian, and a quiet architect of American identity. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was born on July 11th, 1767 in Braintree, Massachusetts, a place that would one day become part of the United States. But at the time of his birth, it was still a British colony. He was born into the heart of the American Revolution, the son of John Adams, one of the founding fathers and the second president of the United States, and Abigail Adams, a woman of deep intellect and unwavering principles. From his earliest days, John Quincy was steeped in politics, diplomacy, and public service. He was not merely a witness to the birth of a nation. He was raised by those who helped deliver it. His parents instilled in him a relentless work ethic and an unshakable commitment to duty. He was educated not only in the best schools in America, but also in Europe, as he accompanied his father on diplomatic missions to France and the Netherlands during the Revolutionary War. These early experiences shaped a worldview that was both broad and nuanced. He became fluent in multiple languages, steeped in classical thought, and possessed a fierce intellect that would define his public life. By the age of 14, John Quincy Adams was already serving as a secretary to the U.S. diplomatic mission in Russia. Few teenagers in any era have ever carried such weight on their shoulders. His grasp of European politics and his ability to navigate complex diplomatic situations earned him admiration at an age when most are still finding their footing. Returning to the United States, he graduated from Harvard College and began practicing law in Boston. But law was never his true calling. Public service was in his blood. In 1794, President George Washington appointed him U.S. Minister to the Netherlands, and a few years later, he was sent to Prussia. During these years abroad, Adams refined his diplomatic skills and became known for his principled, independent approach. Unlike many politicians of his time, he often put country above party. That same independent streak would both define and complicate his political career. When he returned to America, John Quincy Adams was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate and later to the U.S. Senate, where he initially aligned with the Federalist Party. But he was never one to march in lockstep with political factions. His vote in favor of President Thomas Jefferson's Embargo Act of 1807, a deeply unpopular move among Federalists, cost him political support, and he eventually left the party. Yet, Adams did not seem to mind being unpopular if he believed he was doing the right thing. This devotion to principle over popularity would be both his strength and his burden. In 1817, he was appointed Secretary of State under President James Monroe. It was in this role that Adams arguably made his greatest contribution to American foreign policy. He was the chief architect of the Monroe Doctrine, a bold assertion that the Western Hemisphere was no longer open to European colonization. Though President Monroe delivered the message, it was Adams who crafted its philosophy. His vision helped define America's role in the world for generations to come. As Secretary of State, Adams also negotiated the Adams-Onis Treaty with Spain, which resulted in the acquisition of Florida by the United States. He settled long-standing border disputes and played a central role in shaping the young nation's territorial expansion. His legacy in this role alone would have been enough to secure his place in history. But John Quincy Adams's ambition did not end there. In 1824, he ran for president in a race that would go down in history as one of the most controversial. The election featured 4 candidates, all claiming roots in the same Democratic-Republican Party. Adams faced off against Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. Though Jackson won the most popular and electoral votes, he did not secure a majority, throwing the election to the House of Representatives. In what became known as the corrupt bargain, Henry Clay, Speaker of the House, supported Adams, who then won the presidency. When Adams appointed Clay as his Secretary of State, accusations of backroom dealing exploded. Though nothing was ever proven, the damage was done. Adams entered office under a cloud of suspicion, and his presidency was hamstrung from the start. As the 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams had grand visions for the country. He advocated for internal improvements, roads, canals, a national university, and even a national observatory. He believed that the federal government had a role to play in promoting science, education, and infrastructure, but his ideas were often dismissed as elitist or overly ambitious. He was a man ahead of his time, and Congress, especially the supporters of Andrew Jackson, had little interest in supporting his proposals. Adams's presidency was marked more by obstruction than achievement. His passion for public service and intellectual pursuits clashed with the populist mood that was beginning to take hold in American politics. He was perceived as cold, aristocratic, and out of touch with the common man, an image that stood in stark contrast to the rugged war hero persona of Andrew Jackson, who would defeat him in the election of 1828. Most former presidents retreat from public life, write their memoirs, or retire to their estates. But John Quincy Adams was not most men. After losing the presidency, he did something unprecedented. He ran for Congress. In 1830, he was elected to the House of Representatives, where he would serve for the rest of his life, over 17 years. It was there in the House that Adams found his true calling. Unbound by the limitations of the presidency and invigorated by the fight for justice, he became one of the most passionate and effective voices against slavery. Though not an outright abolitionist in the modern sense early in his career, Adams evolved into one of the fiercest opponents of the peculiar institution. He fought tirelessly against the gag rule, a congressional rule that automatically tabled anti-slavery petitions without discussion. Week after week, year after year, he challenged the rule, speaking out against it with moral clarity and constitutional logic. He eventually succeeded in having it repealed, a victory not just for the anti-slavery movement, but for free speech in Congress. Adams also defended the rights of enslaved Africans in the famous Amistad case. In 1841, at the age of 73, he stood before the U.S. Supreme Court to argue for the freedom of 53 Africans who had mutinied against their captors aboard the Spanish slave ship La Amistad. His argument, rooted in natural rights and the principles of the Declaration of Independence, swayed the court. The Africans were freed and returned to their homeland. This moment remains one of the most powerful chapters in Adams' long career. Even as age took its toll, Adams never stopped fighting for what he believed in. He was often referred to as Old Man Eloquent, a fitting name for a man who never ceased to use his voice in the service of truth. On February 21, 1848, John Quincy Adams collapsed on the floor of the House of Representatives while opposing a motion to honor U.S. Army officers who had served in the Mexican-American War, a war he believed was an unjust attempt to expand slavery. He was carried to the Speaker's room, where he lingered for 2 days before dying on February 23rd. His final words were, "This is the end of earth. I am content." It was a fitting end for a man who had spent more than 7 decades in relentless service to his country. His death was mourned across the nation, not just by political allies, but by those who respected his integrity, intellect, and unwavering moral compass. John Quincy Adams lived one of the most extraordinary lives in American history. He was a child of the Revolution, a diplomat by adolescence, a senator, a secretary of state, a president, and a congressman. But titles alone do not define him. He was a man of principle in an age of compromise. He was a public servant who placed duty above ambition, truth above popularity, and country above party. He was driven not by personal gain, but by a vision of America as a beacon of liberty, learning, and justice. Though his presidency was short and politically fraught, his career in public life was long and deeply consequential. He fought for what he believed was right, even when it cost him dearly. He believed that the government had a role not just in defending the nation, but in elevating it, in advancing knowledge, protecting human dignity, and standing firm against tyranny in all its forms. Even today, John Quincy Adams remains a figure of enduring inspiration. In a time when political courage often feels in short supply, his legacy reminds us that greatness in public life is not measured solely by popularity or electoral success, but by the willingness to stand firm in the face of adversity. His life was not one of ease or universal acclaim, but one of integrity, vision, and tireless effort on behalf of the American people. He was a man who lived for the Republic, served through its most turbulent times, and died with his boots on, still speaking truth in the halls of Congress. His story is not just a chapter in the history of the United States. It is a testament to what one determined, principled individual can achieve across the span of a lifetime dedicated to public service. Andrew Jackson. John Andrew Jackson's life is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Born into slavery in Sumter County, South Carolina in the early 19th century, Jackson's early years were marked by the brutal realities of enslavement. His first job, serving as a human scarecrow in the scorching Carolina fields, was a grim introduction to a life of forced labor and dehumanization. As he grew older, he was tasked with managing the plow, a job that proved too physically demanding for his young frame, leading to frequent punishments. Despite these hardships, Jackson found solace in his relationship with Louisa Clifton, a fellow slave from a nearby plantation. Their unofficial marriage and the birth of their 2 children provided a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. However, the cruel institution of slavery did not permit such familial bonds, and Jackson was often whipped for sneaking away to visit his wife and children. The eventual relocation of Louisa's master to Georgia severed this fragile connection, leaving Jackson heartbroken and determined to seek freedom. The brutality Jackson endured was not limited to physical labor. He was subjected to relentless beatings, often for minor infractions or perceived disobedience. One particularly harrowing account describes how he was whipped for failing to pick the required amount of cotton, a punishment that left his back lacerated and bleeding. The overseers on the plantation were merciless, enforcing quotas that were nearly impossible to meet and administering severe punishments for any shortfall. Jackson's narrative also highlights the hypocrisy of slaveholders who professed Christian beliefs while perpetuating such cruelty. He recounts how his master, a former Quaker, engaged in unethical practices, including encouraging slaves to steal cotton in exchange for whiskey. This duplicity extended to religious practices, where slaves were allowed to partake in communion only after their white counterparts, reinforcing a hierarchy even in spiritual matters. The yearning for freedom grew stronger with each passing year. In 1846, Jackson seized an opportunity to escape during the three-day Christmas holiday granted to slaves. He journeyed to Charleston, where he worked on the wharfs to earn money and avoid suspicion. Aware of the dangers of being caught without proper identification, he sold his pony and purchased a cloak to disguise himself. Eventually, he secured passage on a vessel bound for Boston, stowing away and enduring a perilous journey to the north. Upon arrival, Jackson settled in Salem, Massachusetts, where he worked as a leather tanner and part-time sawmill operator. However, the passage of the fugitive slave law rekindled his fears of being captured and returned to slavery. With assistance from Harriet Beecher Stowe, Jackson fled to Canada, seeking refuge in St. John, New Brunswick. In Canada, Jackson remarried and attempted to rebuild his life. Still yearning to reunite with his family, he returned to Boston in 1856 to obtain personal references from Stowe and other prominent figures. The following year, he traveled to Britain with his wife to solicit contributions to purchase his family's freedom. During his time abroad, Jackson lectured in Scotland and England, sharing his experiences and advocating for the abolitionist cause. He collaborated with notable anti-slavery leaders, including David Guthrie, Rev. Thomas Candlish, and Julia Griffiths, a friend and patron of Frederick Douglass. Jackson and his wife established a residence in London, remaining there until after the American Civil War. Eventually, they returned to the United States, settling in Springfield, Massachusetts. Jackson continued to travel back and forth to South Carolina, dedicating himself to assisting the freedmen of Sumter County. In 1862, Jackson published The Experience of a Slave in South Carolina, a powerful narrative detailing his life under slavery and his journey to freedom. The book offers a scathing critique of the institution of slavery and the moral contradictions of those who upheld it. Jackson spares no detail in recounting the horrors he endured, from the murder of his sister to the separation of his family and the frequent whippings he received. He also includes several testimonials to validate the authenticity of his narrative, emphasizing the importance of truth in exposing the atrocities of slavery. The publication of his memoir served as both a personal catharsis and a vital contribution to the abolitionist movement, shedding light on the lived experiences of enslaved individuals. Jackson's life after emancipation was marked by continued activism and a commitment to social justice. In 1893, describing himself as old and feeble, he raised funds to establish an orphan home and school for destitute children in Magnolia, Sumter County, South Carolina. His efforts to uplift his community and provide opportunities for the next generation underscore his enduring dedication to the cause of freedom and equality. Jackson's legacy is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the transformative power of resilience and hope. John Andrew Jackson's journey from slavery to freedom and his subsequent activism serve as a poignant reminder of the enduring struggle for human rights and dignity. His narrative not only documents the brutal realities of slavery, but also highlights the capacity for courage and perseverance in the face of systemic oppression. Through his writings and advocacy, Jackson contributed to a broader understanding of the injustices of slavery and the necessity of abolition. His life story continues to inspire and educate, emphasizing the importance of remembering and honoring those who fought tirelessly for freedom and justice. John Andrew Jackson's resilience and commitment to freedom did not end with the formal abolition of slavery, nor did his efforts to improve the lives of African Americans cease after the Civil War. Even as he settled back into life in the United States, Jackson's focus remained on the transformation of his community and the continued struggle for equality. Despite the systemic obstacles placed before him, he found new ways to advocate for social justice. He worked relentlessly to create opportunities for newly freed individuals, ensuring that they would not be left to languish in the shadows of their former lives. Jackson, having experienced the brutal realities of slavery firsthand, understood the significance of education, opportunity, and support in the fight for genuine freedom. In his later years, Jackson's philanthropic efforts were instrumental in the creation of the Jackson Home for Orphan Children and the Jackson School, institutions meant to offer a sense of security and hope for a future of self-sufficiency. These endeavors were particularly meaningful given the challenges facing African Americans during the Reconstruction era, where former slaves struggled to find stability in a country that had so recently enslaved them. Jackson's vision was clear. He wanted to help pave the way for African Americans to reclaim their dignity and secure a fair shot at a future, regardless of their past. At the time, many former slaves, especially in the South, faced enormous challenges. While they were no longer bound by the physical chains of slavery, they found themselves shackled by a system of sharecropping, discriminatory laws, and societal attitudes that kept them in a cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement. This was particularly true in the post-war South, where the end of the Civil War did not equate to the end of racial oppression. Jackson understood that freedom was not merely the absence of slavery, but the presence of opportunity, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that opportunity was available to those who had suffered under the yoke of slavery for so long. Through his leadership, Jackson was able to impact not just his immediate community, but the broader discourse around race and justice. His example as a former slave turned abolitionist, educator, and philanthropist inspired others to take action in their own communities. He became a symbol of hope, a living testament to what be achieved with perseverance and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. His memoir, The Experience of a Slave in South Carolina, continued to resonate with generations of people who sought to understand the real and devastating consequences of slavery, making it an essential piece of the abolitionist movement's literary canon. As Jackson grew older, his commitment to the cause of African American rights did not waver. In fact, it deepened. His work in Sumter County was a continuation of the struggle for African American empowerment. He sought to establish an equitable society in the South, despite the forces of segregation and institutionalized racism that tried to prevent it. He became a key figure in the establishment of organizations dedicated to advocating for the civil rights of African Americans, ensuring that their voices were heard during a time when silence was often their only option. One of Jackson's key contributions was in the area of education. He firmly believed that education was the cornerstone of freedom and empowerment, and thus dedicated much of his life to advocating for educational opportunities for African Americans. At the orphanage and school he established, Jackson ensured that children had access to an education that would equip them for a future beyond the constraints of racial prejudice. He worked to provide an environment in which children could not only learn, but also thrive, gaining the skills and knowledge that would enable them to build a better life. Furthermore, Jackson was instrumental in advancing the cause of social justice through his public speaking and writing. His experiences as an enslaved person gave him a unique and powerful perspective that he used to draw attention to the ongoing struggles faced by African Americans in the post-Reconstruction era. His speeches, much like his memoir, were a call to action, urging others to join him in the fight for equality. His voice rang with authority, shaped by years of suffering and triumph, and it struck a chord with those who were still fighting for the rights of African Americans in the face of discriminatory laws and practices. As Jackson grew older, his legacy began to take shape as one of the most influential African American figures of his time. His life and work served as both a reflection of the immense challenges that African Americans faced during the 19th and early 20th centuries, and a shining example of the power of perseverance, education, and community. Jackson had not only escaped slavery, but he had also defied the expectations of those who sought to keep African Americans in subjugation. His life showed that the struggle for freedom was not just a political battle, it was a deeply personal one that required both individual courage and collective action. In his final years, Jackson continued to focus on uplifting others. His work in South Carolina, along with his ongoing efforts to help newly freed people transition into a society that was still deeply entrenched in racism and oppression, remained central to his life's mission. Jackson's contributions to the community extended far beyond his time as an enslaved person. He was not content to simply live for himself. Instead, he was determined to ensure that his legacy would serve as a catalyst for change for future generations. Today, John Andrew Jackson's name is not as widely known as other figures in American history, but his contributions to the abolitionist movement and the betterment of African Americans in the Reconstruction are immeasurable. His life exemplifies the resilience of the human spirit and the profound impact of individual acts of resistance against systemic injustice. From his harrowing experiences as an enslaved person to his dedication as an educator and philanthropist, Jackson's legacy endures as a powerful reminder of the strength required to overcome the most brutal systems of oppression. The contributions of John Andrew Jackson are a testament to the unbreakable will of individuals who fought for freedom, equality, and justice. His life reminds us that while the struggle for racial equality is ongoing, the actions of those who came before us laid the foundation for the battles that continue today. Jackson's journey from slavery to freedom is a powerful example of the transformative power of hope, perseverance, and a deep sense of responsibility to others. His story deserves to be told not just as a history of one man's fight for freedom, but as a symbol of the broader struggle for justice that continues to shape America's history. The indomitable spirit of John Andrew Jackson serves as a beacon for all who continue the fight for equality in every corner of the world. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was the 8th President of the United States, a man whose political career was marked by his deep understanding of the intricacies of American politics, yet whose presidency was challenged by the economic crisis of his time. Born on December 5, 1782, in Kinderhook, New York, Martin Van Buren was the son of Dutch immigrants. His early life in the small village of Kinderhook, a place heavily influenced by Dutch culture, played a significant role in shaping his identity and future political career. Growing up in a tight-knit community that prized independence, Van Buren was surrounded by a deep sense of local politics, which would later serve him well in navigating the complex world of national politics. Van Buren's rise in the political world began early, as he was a bright and ambitious young man. At the age of 14, he started working as an apprentice to a local lawyer, which exposed him to the world of law and the legal intricacies of government. His legal career served as the foundation for his political endeavors, and by the time he was in his early 20s, he was already an established attorney. However, what truly set Van Buren apart from his contemporaries was his keen political acumen and ability to navigate the murky waters of New York politics. He was a master of the political machine, known for his ability to build coalitions, broker deals, and maintain a loyal following. In the early 1800s, Van Buren became a key figure in the Democratic-Republican Party, which would eventually evolve into the Democratic Party. He played a critical role in the development of the political organization known as the Albany Regency, a powerful political machine that controlled New York State politics. Through this machine, Van Buren was able to consolidate power and influence, eventually gaining the attention of national political leaders. His ability to maintain political loyalty and create a cohesive political structure was one of his most notable achievements, and it would be a defining feature of his career. Van Buren's political strategy was based on the principle of party discipline and unity, which he believed were essential for maintaining power and influence in a rapidly changing political landscape. Van Buren's political savvy quickly led him to higher offices, and in 1821, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. His time in the Senate allowed him to build connections with some of the most prominent figures in American politics, including Andrew Jackson, the future president who would become one of his closest allies. It was Jackson who would ultimately propel Van Buren into the national spotlight. Van Buren served as Jackson's Secretary of State from 1829 to 1831, a position that gave him significant influence in shaping Jackson's foreign policy. His time in Jackson's cabinet also solidified his reputation as a master of political maneuvering and party organization, skills that would prove invaluable when he later sought the presidency. Van Buren's time as Secretary of State helped him gain the trust and confidence of Andrew Jackson, and in 1832, he was chosen as Jackson's running mate for the presidential election. This partnership was key to his political rise. Jackson's victory in 1832 solidified Van Buren's position as the heir apparent to the presidency. In 1836, after Jackson chose not to run for a third term, Van Buren was the Democratic Party's candidate for president. The election of 1836 was a fierce contest, with Van Buren facing off against several Whig Party candidates, including William Henry Harrison. Despite the fragmented opposition, Van Buren won the presidency with a narrow victory, becoming the 8th president of the United States. Van Buren's presidency, however, was far from smooth sailing. Upon taking office in 1837, he was immediately faced with the Panic of 1837, a financial crisis that plunged the nation into a severe economic depression. The causes of the panic were complex, but they included speculative land investments, the collapse of the Bank of the United States, and a sudden withdrawal of British investment in American businesses. Van Buren's response to the crisis was one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency. He believed that government intervention in the economy should be minimal and that the country should not rely on a central bank. As a result, he rejected calls for federal assistance and advocated for a policy of economic retrenchment. While his stance may have aligned with his personal beliefs in limited government, it also led to widespread criticism. Many Americans were suffering from high unemployment, falling wages, and widespread poverty, and Van Buren's reluctance to provide federal aid left him increasingly isolated from the public. Despite the economic crisis, Van Buren's presidency was also marked by a number of important accomplishments, including the establishment of the independent Treasury system. This system was designed to separate the federal government's finances from private banks, ensuring that the government's funds were secure and not subject to manipulation by banking interests. The independent Treasury system was a key part of Van Buren's efforts to stabilize the nation's finances and prevent future economic instability. However, the system was not popular with many, and it became one of the major points of contention in the election of 1840. The economic difficulties of his presidency were compounded by growing political divisions within the country. The Whig Party, which had formed in opposition to Jackson's policies, became a formidable political force during Van Buren's time in office. The Whigs seized on the economic distress of the American people, using it to fuel their political campaigns and challenge Van Buren's leadership. In the election of 1840, the Whigs nominated William Henry Harrison for president, and their campaign focused heavily on the economic hardships faced by ordinary Americans. Harrison, who had gained fame as a military hero during the War of 1812, was portrayed as a man of the people, in contrast to Van Buren's image as an elitist. The Whigs also capitalized on the economic crisis, portraying Van Buren as out of touch with the struggles of the average American. The election of 1840 was a decisive one, and Harrison won in a landslide, defeating Van Buren and ushering in a new era of Whig leadership. After his defeat in the 1840 election, Van Buren retired from active politics, but remained a prominent figure in American public life. He never fully withdrew from the political scene, and in 1848, he made a brief return to national politics as the candidate for the Free Soil Party, a political organization that opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. Although his bid for the presidency was unsuccessful, it marked the end of his active involvement in mainstream politics. In the years following his defeat, Van Buren wrote extensively about his political experiences and philosophy, offering valuable insights into the workings of American democracy. He spent his final years on his estate in Kinderhook, where he died on July 24, 1862. Martin Van Buren's legacy is a complex one, shaped by both his political achievements and the challenges he faced during his presidency. He was a brilliant political strategist who helped to create the modern Democratic Party and played a pivotal role in the evolution of American politics. However, his presidency was marred by the economic turmoil of the Panic of 1837, and his policies, particularly his resistance to federal intervention, were controversial at the time. Despite these challenges, Van Buren's contributions to American political thought and party organization remain significant. His life and career serve as a reminder of the complexities of leadership in times of crisis and the enduring impact of political parties on the course of American history. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was a man born into privilege, raised with purpose, and remembered more for the brevity of his presidency than for the depth of his contributions to American history. But to truly understand the man behind the shortest presidential term in U.S. history, we need to go far beyond the surface. We need to look back to a time when the American Republic was young and the possibilities of westward expansion were stirring the imagination of the nation. Harrison's story begins on February 9, 1773, in Charles City County, Virginia, at the Berkeley Plantation, one of the grandest and most storied estates of its time. He was born into one of Virginia's most prominent families. His father, Benjamin Harrison Feith, was not only a wealthy planter and politician, but also a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Politics ran deep in the Harrison bloodline, and from an early age, William was surrounded by discussions of revolution, independence, and the ideals that would form the backbone of the United States. Though initially intended for a career in medicine, Harrison's life would take a sharp turn following the death of his father when he was just 18. With limited financial support and a yearning for action, he joined the United States Army in 1791. It was a bold move that would define his early career and earn him a lasting place in American military history. Under General Anthony Wayne, Harrison fought in the Northwest Indian War, a brutal conflict between American forces and a confederation of Native American tribes allied with the British. Harrison's rise was quick. He gained a reputation for bravery and leadership, distinguishing himself at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, a pivotal victory that helped to secure American dominance in the Northwest Territory. This experience not only shaped his military acumen, but also solidified his reputation as a soldier who could be trusted with command. After resigning from the military in 1798, Harrison transitioned seamlessly into politics. President John Adams appointed him Secretary of the Northwest Territory, and shortly afterward he became the territory's delegate to Congress. Harrison championed land policies that favored small farmers and settlers, policies that would accelerate westward expansion. In 1800, he became the first governor of the Indiana Territory, a position he would hold for 12 years. It was during this time that Harrison's legacy would become both admired and controversial. As governor, he negotiated a series of treaties with Native American tribes, acquiring over 60 million acres of land. Though these treaties helped settlers flood into the new territories, they often came at a steep cost to the indigenous people, many of whom felt they had been manipulated, pressured, or deceived. The growing resentment among Native American tribes gave rise to one of Harrison's most enduring challenges, the resistance led by the Shawnee chief Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the prophet. Tecumseh's vision was bold. He sought to unite various tribes into a confederacy that could resist further encroachment. In 1811, Harrison would clash with this rising movement at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Acting on intelligence that Tecumseh was away recruiting allies, Harrison led an expedition to Prophetstown, where the prophet's followers were camped. The pre-dawn attack and the fierce fighting that followed made the Battle of Tippecanoe a symbol of American resilience, and for Harrison, a badge of honor. Though the victory was more tactical than strategic, it shattered the cohesion of Tecumseh's Confederacy and propelled Harrison to national fame. Tippecanoe and Tyler too, the future campaign slogan, had its roots in that muddy battlefield. The War of 1812 gave Harrison another chance to shine. As tensions with Britain escalated into open conflict, Harrison was appointed a major general in the army and given command of the Northwest. His most celebrated moment came at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, where his forces decisively defeated a combined British and Native American army. Tecumseh was killed in that battle, effectively ending serious native resistance in the region. Harrison's star continued to rise. By the war's end, he was a hero, hailed in newspapers and celebrated by the public. But Harrison, never quite comfortable in the political intrigue that followed military triumph, resigned from the Army in 1814 and briefly retired to his Ohio farm. Of course, William Henry Harrison's retreat from public life didn't last long. He served in various governmental positions over the years, including as a U.S. congressman, a state senator in Ohio, and as a U.S. senator. In 1828, President John Quincy Adams appointed him as his minister to Gran Colombia, which included present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. His tenure there was brief and turbulent. Harrison's letters home, critical of South American leaders and skeptical of their commitment to republicanism, angered Andrew Jackson, who had just won the presidency. Jackson dismissed Harrison from the post in 1829. The relationship between Harrison and Jackson was strained, and their differing philosophies would come to define an emerging divide in American politics. Jackson represented the frontier populist spirit, while Harrison, though also a man of the West, still retained the gentlemanly mannerisms of an earlier political age. In the 1830s, as the second party system emerged, Harrison found a home with the Whigs, a party formed in opposition to Jackson's growing executive power. The Whigs needed a military hero to challenge the Democrats, someone with name recognition, a patriotic resume, and a reputation for integrity. Harrison, with his battlefield glory and dignified demeanor, fit the bill. He was nominated as the Whig candidate in 1836, but lost to Martin Van Buren. Still, the Whigs saw potential. When economic panic struck under Van Buren's presidency, Harrison's moment arrived. In 1840, the Whigs launched one of the most energetic and theatrical campaigns in American history. They portrayed Harrison as a humble log cabin dweller who drank hard cider, contrasting him with the supposedly elitist and out-of-touch Van Buren. It was a wildly effective marketing strategy. Harrison's military exploits, especially Tippecanoe, were played up with songs, parades, and slogans. Tippecanoe and Tyler 2 became a rallying cry, and the log cabin became a symbol of accessible American leadership. In reality, Harrison was anything but a common man. He came from wealth, lived comfortably, and had little in common with the frontier farmers he was supposed to represent. But in politics, perception is everything. Riding a wave of public support, Harrison won the election by a landslide, securing 234 electoral votes to Van Buren's 60. At age 68, he became the oldest president elected at that time, and also the first from the Whig Party to hold the office. The nation expected much from Harrison, a man with decades of experience and a reputation for integrity. But what came next was not a tale of leadership. It was a tragic twist that made him a footnote in presidential history. On March 4, 1841, William Henry Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in American history, nearly 2 hours long, in freezing weather and without wearing a hat or overcoat. Whether out of defiance, pride, or simple miscalculation, his decision to brave the elements would prove fatal. He caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. As the weeks passed, his condition deteriorated. Despite the efforts of his doctors, Harrison died on April 4, 1841, exactly 1 month after taking office. He served just 31 days, the shortest presidency in American history. His death marked the first time a sitting U.S. president had died in office, plunging the young nation into uncharted constitutional waters. There was uncertainty over presidential succession. Should Vice President John Tyler become the president, or merely act as a placeholder? Tyler insisted on assuming the full powers and title of the presidency, setting a precedent that would carry forward into American governance. Harrison's death, while personally tragic, helped clarify a crucial element of presidential succession that had been vaguely outlined in the Constitution. In the wake of his passing, the nation mourned. Newspapers across the country eulogized him as a man of honor and service, a veteran statesman who had finally reached the pinnacle of his career, only to be struck down before he could govern. Harrison's funeral was a somber affair, and his body was eventually interred at his family's estate in North Bend, Ohio, overlooking the Ohio River. In the years that followed, William Henry Harrison's legacy was overshadowed by the brevity of his presidency. He became the answer to trivia questions, the butt of jokes, the man remembered more for dying than for living. Yet beneath that shallow impression lies a much deeper narrative, a life shaped by war, driven by duty, and defined by the complexities of America's early expansion. He was a man of his time, navigating the rugged terrain of a young and rapidly growing nation. His policies toward Native Americans, while effective from the standpoint of American settlers, came at a devastating cost to indigenous populations. His military victories helped shape the borders and future of the United States, but they also contributed to a painful legacy of displacement. His political career, though often modest, reflected the shifting tides of early American partisanship and the emergence of modern campaign strategies. In many ways, William Henry Harrison was a bridge between the Revolutionary generation and the Civil War era, between the agrarian vision of the founders and the industrial ambitions of a new America. His grandson, Benjamin Harrison, would later become the 23rd President of the United States, making them one of only two grandfather-grandson pairs to hold the office. Though his presidency lasted just a month, the echoes of his life stretch far beyond those 31 days. He was a general, a governor, a diplomat, a congressman, and finally a president. And even in death, he left a mark, forcing the nation to confront the realities of leadership, the fragility of life, and the need for clear constitutional guidance. William Henry Harrison may not have had the time to implement grand policies or shape the nation through sweeping reforms, but he lived a life that was rich in service and steeped in the struggles of a growing republic. To remember Harrison solely as the president who died after a month is to overlook a life of profound significance, a life that helped carve the path of the American frontier, that battled fiercely for the ideals of expansion and security, and that ultimately helped define the responsibilities of the highest office in the land. John Tyler. John Tyler was a man born into privilege and tradition, but who would ultimately stand at the center of a constitutional crisis that would shape the American presidency. Born on March 29, 1790, in Charles City County, Virginia, Tyler was raised among the elite of Southern society. His father, John Tyler Sr., was a prominent planter and served as governor of Virginia. From an early age, young John was immersed in the values of Jeffersonian democracy, strict construction of the Constitution, limited federal power, and a devotion to states' rights. These principles would remain his political compass throughout his life. He graduated from the College of William and Mary at just 17 and quickly moved to law and politics. By the age of 21, he was already serving in the Virginia House of Delegates, where he began building his reputation as a staunch defender of state sovereignty. Tyler's political career progressed steadily. He served as a U.S. representative, governor of Virginia, and U.S. senator, becoming known for his oratory skills and unwavering belief in the limitations of federal power. As a senator, he opposed many of President Andrew Jackson's policies, particularly Jackson's aggressive use of executive power, which Tyler viewed as dangerously expansive. Although a former Democrat, Tyler broke with the party over this issue and allied himself with the emerging Whig Party, which stood in opposition to Jacksonian autocracy. This alliance was more of convenience than conviction, as Tyler shared few of the Whigs' economic beliefs. Nevertheless, when the Whigs nominated William Henry Harrison for president in 1840, they selected Tyler as his running mate to balance the ticket with a Southern states' rights candidate. The campaign slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," swept the nation. Harrison won in a landslide, and Tyler became vice president of the United States. Tyler assumed the vice presidency in March 1841, a position he considered largely ceremonial. But just a month later, history took a sudden and unprecedented turn. President Harrison, the oldest man to be elected president at the time, contracted pneumonia after giving a lengthy inaugural address in the cold and rain. He died on April 4, 1841, after serving just 31 days in office. This tragic event thrust John Tyler into the presidency under circumstances never before encountered. The U.S. Constitution was vague on the matter. It stated only that the powers and duties of the presidency would devolve on the vice president in the event of the president's death. What that meant in practical terms was unclear. Was Tyler now the acting president, or was he the president in full? Tyler made his position clear immediately. He took the presidential oath of office and moved into the White House, asserting that he was indeed the President of the United States, not merely an acting placeholder. His decision set a critical precedent that has defined the office ever since. Though some members of Congress and the press derisively referred to him as His Accidency, Tyler stood firm. His bold stance created the standard for presidential succession that would later be formalized in the 25th Amendment more than a century later. Despite assuming the presidency with constitutional confidence, Tyler found himself politically isolated. Although he had been elected on a Whig ticket, he held few Whig views, particularly on issues like the national bank and internal improvements. He repeatedly clashed with Whig leaders, especially Senator Henry Clay, who expected Tyler to rubber stamp the Whig legislative agenda. When Tyler vetoed bills to establish a new national bank, one of Clay's top priorities, the Whigs turned on him. In an extraordinary move, the entire cabinet, with the exception of Secretary of State Daniel Webster, resigned in protest. Tyler was effectively expelled from the Whig Party, becoming the first and only president to govern without the support of the party that elected him. He stood alone in the executive mansion, a man without a party, besieged by critics from all sides. Still, Tyler pressed forward with a mix of ideological resolve and political cunning. His presidency, while rocky, was not without achievements. He championed a strict interpretation of the Constitution and sought to limit the reach of federal power. On foreign policy, he made significant strides. Under his administration, the long-standing border dispute with Britain over Maine was peacefully resolved through the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. Tyler also initiated talks with China that led to the Treaty of Wanghea in 1844, establishing important commercial rights for the United States. Yet it was his pursuit of Texas annexation that would define the final years of his presidency and further divide the nation. The question of Texas had simmered for years. The independent Republic of Texas, having broken from Mexico in 1836, sought annexation by the United States. Tyler, motivated by both expansionist fervor and hopes of securing a political legacy, made Texas annexation the centerpiece of his foreign policy. But the issue was politically explosive. Many in the North feared that annexing Texas would expand slavery and provoke war with Mexico. Tyler pressed forward anyway, believing it was America's manifest destiny to extend from coast to coast. His efforts were met with fierce resistance. A treaty to annex Texas failed in the Senate in 1844, dealing Tyler a humiliating blow. Undeterred, he tried to maneuver around the Senate by proposing annexation through a joint resolution of Congress, which required only a simple majority. This tactic was controversial, but ultimately successful. In March 1845, just days before he left office, Congress passed the resolution, and Tyler signed it into law. Texas would soon become the 28th state, an outcome that pleased expansionists but enraged abolitionists and heightened tensions with Mexico, laying the groundwork for war. Tyler's presidency was marked by political estrangement, and he faced immense opposition from both parties. There was even a serious attempt to impeach him, led by former allies turned enemies in Congress. But he survived the effort and served out his term. Still, with no party backing and a deeply fractured electorate, Tyler had little hope of re-election. He briefly attempted to run in 1844 as the head of a third party, the Tyler Party. But when it became clear he had no path to victory, he withdrew and threw his support behind Democrat James K. Polk, who shared his views on Texas annexation and westward expansion. After leaving the White House in 1845, Tyler retired to his Virginia plantation, Sherwood Forest, where he remained politically active, though largely in the shadows. He watched as the nation he had once led moved closer to fracture. As sectional tensions escalated in the 1850s, Tyler aligned more closely with Southern interests. Though he once favored preserving the Union, by the time Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, Tyler had embraced secession. He participated in the Virginia Secession Convention and was elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, though he died before he could take his seat. John Tyler passed away on January 18, 1862, at the age of 71. His death went largely unrecognized by the Union government. President Lincoln did not issue an official mourning proclamation, and flags in Washington did not fly at half-mast. In the eyes of the United States, Tyler had become a traitor. But his legacy is more complex. He was a man of deep principle, a constitutional purist who refused to compromise his beliefs, even when it cost him politically. His assertion of presidential authority in the face of constitutional ambiguity set a vital precedent that remains intact to this day. Yet his commitment to states' rights and alignment with the Confederacy in his final years clouded his reputation and tethered him to one of the darkest chapters in American history. Despite being often overlooked or dismissed, Tyler's presidency carries important lessons about power, principle, and the fragility of political alliances. He governed without a party, led without popular mandate, and made decisions that infuriated nearly everyone. Yet he navigated uncharted constitutional waters with determination and clarity. His presidency was not marked by sweeping legislative victories or mass popularity, but by the resolute assertion of a crucial idea that the office of president was not a placeholder, not a part-time role, but a full and enduring seat of national leadership. That idea, born out of sudden tragedy and sustained through political fire, is John Tyler's most enduring contribution to American history. In the broader sweep of presidential history, Tyler remains a study in contradictions. He was a Virginian aristocrat who claimed to speak for the common man. He distrusted federal power, yet wielded the presidency to push through territorial expansion. He was derided in his time, yet respected by later constitutional scholars for the precedent he set. His was not a presidency of grand vision or soaring rhetoric, but of careful decisions and rigid adherence to principle. In many ways, Tyler was a man out of sync with his era, a relic of the Jeffersonian past navigating a nation hurtling towards civil war. His story reminds us that leadership often comes not from grand ambition or political consensus, but from the ability to stand firm when the ground beneath is shifting. And perhaps that's the paradox of John Tyler, the man who became president by accident, governed without allies, and left office without fanfare, yet changed the course of presidential power forever. He didn't seek greatness, and history has rarely granted it to him, but his impact, though subtle, was significant. He taught the nation that even in the face of uncertainty, the Constitution must be interpreted with conviction, and that the duties of the presidency cannot be taken lightly. For better or worse, Tyler believed in what he was doing, even when the entire political world turned against him. That belief, that stubborn resolve, makes him one of the most unique and quietly influential figures ever to occupy the White House. James K. Polk. James K. Polk, the 11th President of the United States, remains one of the most consequential yet often overlooked leaders in American history. Born on November 2, 1795, in a log cabin in Pineville, North Carolina, Polk grew up in a modest but ambitious family. He was the eldest of 10 children, and from an early age, his sharp intellect and determination set him apart. He suffered from ill health throughout his youth, including gallstones, which eventually required a painful and dangerous surgery with no anesthesia, an ordeal that may have shaped his quiet stoicism and unwavering will. When his family moved to Tennessee, Polk was exposed to the frontier spirit of the young American Republic, an environment that influenced both his political philosophy and leadership style. He attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he excelled academically and graduated with honors in 1818. Following college, Polk studied law under the mentorship of Felix Grundy and was admitted to the Tennessee bar in 1820. Just a few years later, he entered politics, serving in the Tennessee state legislature and quickly making a name for himself as a disciplined and capable leader with a gift for strategy. Polk's early political career saw a swift ascent, largely aided by his alliance with Andrew Jackson, whose populist vision Polk shared and admired. He became a staunch Jacksonian Democrat and was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1825. Polk served for 14 years in Congress, eventually rising to the powerful position of Speaker of the House, the only president in American history to have held that title before entering the White House. His time in Congress sharpened his skills in legislative maneuvering and reinforced his belief in a limited federal government, a balanced budget, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. These principles would become hallmarks of his presidency. After leaving Congress, Polk served as the governor of Tennessee, though with mixed success. He lost re-election bids twice, which temporarily derailed his political momentum. However, his unwavering dedication to the Democratic Party and his loyalty to Jacksonian ideals kept him in national conversations. When the Democratic National Convention met in 1844, Polk was not even considered a leading candidate. The frontrunner was former President Martin Van Buren. But when Van Buren lost support over his opposition to the annexation of Texas, the convention deadlocked. Through a blend of strategic alliances and backroom negotiations, Polk emerged as a dark horse candidate, the first in American history to rise from relative obscurity to win his party's nomination for president. Polk's campaign was focused and unapologetically expansionist. He championed the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that it was America's divine right to expand across the American continent. His slogan, 54-40 or fight, referred to the northern boundary of the Oregon Territory and resonated strongly with voters who believed in westward expansion. Polk also supported the annexation of Texas, which was then an independent republic after seceding from Mexico. His positions on these issues helped him narrowly defeat Henry Clay in the general election. Upon taking office in 1845, Polk set an ambitious agenda for his presidency, vowing to accomplish 4 major goals: the reestablishment of an independent treasury system, the reduction of tariffs, the acquisition of the Oregon Territory, and the annexation of California and the rest of the Southwest from Mexico. Remarkably, he achieved all of these within a single term, a feat that stands as a testament to his efficiency and focus. Polk approached the presidency with an intense work ethic. He reportedly worked long hours, often without delegating much responsibility, and believed the presidency should be a hands-on role. He even imposed strict limits on White House social events, preferring to concentrate on governing rather than entertaining. His independent treasury system helped stabilize the national economy by separating government finances from private banking institutions, thereby reducing corruption and speculation. He also enacted the Walker Tariff, which lowered import duties and helped fuel economic growth, especially in the South. But it was in the realm of foreign policy and territorial expansion where Polk left his most lasting mark. His administration negotiated a peaceful settlement with Britain over the Oregon Territory, setting the boundary at the 49th parallel and avoiding war with a major power. However, the more dramatic and controversial expansion came in the form of the Mexican-American War. Polk believed that the United States had a rightful claim to Texas, and that further expansion into California and the Southwest was not only inevitable, but also essential to the nation's destiny. When Mexico refused to sell the desired territories, Polk provoked a confrontation by sending American troops under General Zachary Taylor into the disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. When Mexican forces attacked, Polk declared that American blood had been shed on American soil and asked Congress for a declaration of war. Though critics, including a young Abraham Lincoln, questioned the justification for the conflict, the war was approved and would go on to dramatically reshape the American map. The war, which lasted from 1846 to 1848, was a resounding military success for the United States. American forces captured vast swaths of territory, including Mexico City itself. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in 1848, ended the war and resulted in Mexico ceding more than 500,000 square miles of land to the United States. What is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. This acquisition, known as the Mexican Cession, fulfilled Polk's expansionist dreams and made the United States a continental power. It also intensified the national debate over slavery, as questions arose about whether slavery would be permitted in the newly acquired territories. Polk, a slaveholder himself, tried to sidestep the issue by focusing on his constitutional limits, but the seeds of sectional conflict were already planted. His expansionist policies had succeeded beyond measure, but they had also exacerbated tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War. Despite the controversies, Polk remained true to his word and declined to seek a second term. He believed a single term was enough and that presidents should not overstay their welcome. He left office in March 1849, having achieved every major objective he had set out to accomplish. However, his time out of office was tragically short. Exhausted from 4 years of relentless work and possibly weakened by cholera, Polk died just 3 months later on June 15, 1849, at the age of 53, making him the youngest president to die of natural causes at the time. His wife, Sarah Childress Polk, whom he had married in 1824, would go on to live another 40 years, becoming a revered figure in Washington society and fiercely protective of her husband's legacy. James K. Polk's presidency was transformative. Under his leadership, the United States expanded its territory by more than 1/3, laying the groundwork for its emergence as a global power. He was a man of intense discipline, clear vision, and a single-minded focus on achieving his goals. Unlike many politicians of his time, Polk avoided the spotlight and preferred quiet diligence over public grandstanding. He did not seek popularity, but rather results. This approach won him respect, even from his critics, and made him one of the most effective one-term presidents in American history. Yet for all his accomplishments, Polk remains a paradoxical figure, praised for his effectiveness and vision, but also criticized for the means by which he achieved them. His use of executive power to provoke war and expand territory set precedents that would be both emulated and challenged by future presidents. Moreover, his legacy is deeply entwined with the expansion of slavery and the sectional divisions that followed. Still, historians often place Polk among the top tier of American presidents for one simple reason: he got things done. He promised specific results and delivered them, reshaping the nation in the process. His belief in manifest destiny captured the imagination of a country eager to grow, and his firm, strategic leadership ensured that growth occurred with astonishing speed. Unlike many politicians who are guided by public opinion or distracted by personal ambition, Polk knew exactly what he wanted to achieve when he entered office, and he refused to leave until the mission was complete. In that sense, he exemplified a kind of purposeful leadership that has become increasingly rare in American political life. He remains a compelling case study in the power of focused governance, and while he may not be the most celebrated or charismatic president, his impact is undeniable. James K. Polk's story is one of resolve, strategy, and transformation. He came into power as an underdog, governed with an iron will, and left office having profoundly changed the United States. From the Pacific coast to the Gulf of Mexico, the land that Americans now take for granted as part of their national identity was largely shaped by Polk's vision and execution. And though his presidency lasted only 4 years, those years stand among the most pivotal in American history. In many ways, Polk was the architect of modern America, not through soaring rhetoric or iconic speeches, but through action, policy, and relentless commitment to a set of clearly defined goals. His name might not appear on as many monuments or in as many classrooms as others, but the America we know today bears his imprint in every corner of the map. His was a presidency of substance over style, achievement over applause. And in that quiet strength lies the enduring legacy of James K. Polk. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was a man of quiet resolve, fierce loyalty, and unshakable duty. His rise from a frontier soldier to the President of the United States is one of grit, circumstance, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Born on November 24, 1784, in Orange County, Virginia, Taylor came into the world amid the turbulent winds of revolution. His family soon moved westward to Kentucky, settling in the untamed frontier where the ideals of independence and self-reliance were more than just concepts, they were necessities for survival. Taylor's upbringing in this rugged environment shaped the tough, no-nonsense persona he would carry with him into his military and political life. Unlike many presidents before and after him, Taylor never dreamed of politics. His heart was with the military, and it was on the battlefield that he carved out his reputation. His military career began in 1808 when he was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the 7th Infantry Regiment of the U.S. Army. The early years of his service were relatively quiet, but he would soon be tested in the War of 1812. Though not as famous for his actions in that war as others like Andrew Jackson, Taylor proved himself a competent and reliable officer. His defense of Fort Harrison in Indiana against a superior force of Native American warriors was a defining moment, earning him national recognition and the brevet rank of major. Even then, Taylor showed signs of the fearless leader he would become, a man willing to fight tooth and nail for every inch of ground and every soldier under his command. For decades, Taylor continued to serve in various military roles, often stationed in remote and hostile areas. He commanded troops in the Black Hawk War and fought in the Seminole Wars in Florida, where his stubborn persistence and tactical adaptability earned him the nickname Old Rough and Ready. It wasn't a glamorous title, but it fit Taylor perfectly. He was rough in demeanor, often dressing like the enlisted men under his command and preferring the simplicity of camp life over the formality of military headquarters. And he was always ready to lead, to defend, and to fight regardless of the conditions or odds. His men respected him for that. They saw in him not just a commander, but a comrade, someone who shared their hardships, who ate their food, who walked through the same mud and rain. That deep connection with his troops would remain one of Taylor's defining characteristics. It wasn't until the Mexican-American War that Zachary Taylor would become a household name. The conflict, which began in 1846, was rooted in the U.S. annexation of Texas and the disputed border between Texas and Mexico. President James K. Polk, eager to assert American claims and extend the nation's borders to the Pacific, sent Taylor and his troops to the Rio Grande. It was a tense and uncertain mission. No one knew how far Mexico would go to resist, but Taylor didn't flinch. He established a fortified position and waited. When Mexican forces crossed the Rio Grande and attacked in April 1846, Taylor was ready. What followed were a series of remarkable victories. At the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, Taylor's forces, though outnumbered, decisively defeated the Mexican army. His calm under pressure and his ability to inspire confidence in his men made the difference. News of the victories spread quickly, and Taylor was suddenly a national hero. Congress praised him. Newspapers called him a true American warrior. Even those skeptical of the war couldn't help but admire his courage. But the true test came at the Battle of Buena Vista in February 1847. Facing a much larger Mexican force led by General Santa Anna, Taylor held his ground in a brutal and bloody confrontation in the mountain passes of northern Mexico. His refusal to retreat, his clever use of artillery, and his iconic command, "Double shot your guns and give 'em hell, boys," turned the tide of battle. Santa Anna's forces withdrew, and Taylor emerged victorious once more. The Battle of Buena Vista cemented Zachary Taylor's place in American history. He returned to the United States as one of the most celebrated military figures of his time. But with that fame came an unexpected twist: politics. The Whig Party, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on his popularity, has approached Taylor about running for president in 1848. He had no political experience, no clear platform, and, at first, no interest. He didn't even vote in elections. But Taylor was a man of duty. And when he saw the division and instability growing in the nation, he accepted the nomination. It was a strange campaign by modern standards. Taylor barely campaigned at all. He made few speeches, gave few promises, and let his reputation do the talking. And it worked. In November 1848, Zachary Taylor was elected the 12th president of the United States. Taylor's presidency began at a moment of intense national division. The issue of slavery was tearing at the fabric of the Union. The question of whether new territories acquired from Mexico would allow slavery loomed large, and passions were high. Though he himself was a slaveholder, Taylor took a surprisingly moderate stance. He believed the Union was paramount, and he was unwilling to let the expansion of slavery become a wedge that would destroy the nation. He urged California and New Mexico to apply for statehood immediately, bypassing the territorial stage and avoiding the question of whether slavery would be allowed there. This move angered many in the South who feared losing political power. Some even began to talk of secession. Taylor's response was firm and uncompromising. He had no patience for disunion. He made it clear that if any state attempted to secede, he would treat it as treason and use force to preserve the Union. Coming from a man with Taylor's military background, that wasn't an empty threat. He was willing to fight another war, this time a civil war, if that was what it took to hold the country together. But just as he was beginning to navigate this turbulent landscape, fate intervened. In July 1850, after attending a long ceremony at the Washington Monument on a hot day and reportedly consuming raw fruit and cold milk, Taylor fell ill. His condition worsened rapidly. Despite the efforts of doctors, he died just 5 days later on July 9th, 1850. The exact cause remains uncertain, though the most accepted diagnosis is acute gastroenteritis. Taylor's sudden death shocked the nation. He had served just 16 months in office. His vice president, Millard Fillmore, succeeded him, and with that, Taylor's brief but significant presidency came to an end. Yet, even in death, Zachary Taylor left an impression. He was buried in Louisville, Kentucky, at what would later become the Zachary Taylor National Cemetery. In the years since, historians have looked back on Taylor's life with a mix of admiration and curiosity. He wasn't a visionary like Jefferson or Lincoln. He wasn't a skilled orator or a master politician, but he was a man of character, steady, brave, and principled. He didn't seek power, but when it found him, he carried its weight with honor. Taylor's legacy is complex. As a general, he was one of the most successful military leaders in American history. His victories in the Mexican-American War reshaped the map of the United States and brought vast new territories into the Union. As president, he stood at the crossroads of a nation on the brink of division. Though he didn't live long enough to steer the country through the coming storm, his instincts were clear. He believed in the Constitution, in the rule of law, and above all, in the unity of the nation. In many ways, he was a man caught between two worlds, the old frontier he came from and the modern nation he helped build. And perhaps that's why he remains a fascinating figure. He wasn't polished, he wasn't political, but he was real. He was a soldier who led from the front, a leader who put duty above ambition, and a president who, even in his short time in office, reminded the nation of the values that had shaped its founding. In an age of uncertainty, Zachary Taylor offered something solid, a reminder that character still mattered, that courage still counted, and that sometimes the right man for the moment is the one who never sought the spotlight at all. His presidency may have been brief, but his impact on the battlefield, in the White House, and in the hearts of his countrymen continues to echo through history. From the wilderness of Kentucky to the halls of the White House, from the dust of Palo Alto to the mountain passes of Buena Vista, Zachary Taylor walked a path few have ever trod. He wore no medals, sought no titles, and made no speeches for fame. He simply did the job. He served. And in the end, that may be the greatest legacy of all. Millard Fillmore, a name that rarely rings loudly in the halls of American history, yet behind the quiet syllables lies a president whose journey from log cabin to the White House embodies the peculiar complexity of the 19th century. He wasn't born into power or privilege, and his rise was not marked by grand heroism or fiery speeches. Instead, Millard Fillmore's path was carved through sheer determination, sharp intellect, and an unwavering commitment to order, law, and compromise, a word that would come to define not only his political style, but also his presidency. Born on January 7, 1800, in a humble log cabin in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, Millard Fillmore was the second of 9 children in a family scraping to get by. His father, Nathaniel Fillmore, was a tenant farmer, and young Millard's early life was marked by hard labor and limited formal education. In a time when success often depended on wealth or connections, Fillmore had neither. Yet what he did possess was a restless ambition and a deep hunger for knowledge. As a teenager, he apprenticed with a clothmaker, but it was clear he was destined for something beyond the loom and spindle. Determined to rise, Fillmore pursued education in fits and starts, attending whatever schools he could and reading voraciously in his spare time. His break came when he studied law under the tutelage of Judge Walter Wood, later enrolling at a local law school in Buffalo where he would establish his legal career. In 1823, he was admitted to the bar, and soon after, he began practicing law and gradually making a name for himself in the region. By the 1830s, Fillmore had become a prominent lawyer known for his clarity of argument, his prudence, and his meticulous nature. His entry into politics came as a member of the Anti-Masonic Party, a short-lived political movement born out of suspicion toward the secretive Freemasons. But his views quickly evolved, and he aligned with the Whig Party, a newly formed coalition of national Republicans, anti-Jacksonians, and others seeking to promote modernization and economic development. Fillmore's political star rose steadily. He was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1828, where he advocated for fiscal responsibility and improved public education. His moderate, detail-oriented approach earned him respect, even if it didn't inspire passion. In 1832, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, beginning a long association with national politics. During his time in Congress, Fillmore made a name for himself as a cautious, methodical legislator. He opposed the annexation of Texas and resisted the expansion of slavery, though his opposition was often framed in constitutional terms rather than moral outrage. He believed the federal government had limits and that preserving the Union sometimes meant accepting compromises that made everyone uncomfortable. Fillmore's pragmatism helped him secure a leadership role on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, where he championed protective tariffs, internal improvements, and a strong national bank, all pillars of the Whig platform. Despite his successes in Washington, Fillmore faced challenges at home. The shifting tides of politics, factionalism within the Whig Party, and the rise of new power brokers sometimes left him sidelined. He ran unsuccessfully for governor of New York in 1844, but rebounded 2 years later when he was elected New York State Comptroller, becoming the first to hold that position. His tenure was marked by a drive to clean up the state's finances, and he earned a reputation as a skilled administrator. This growing reputation put him in the sights of the Whig leadership as a potential vice presidential candidate. In 1848, the Whigs nominated Mexican war hero Zachary Taylor for president, a man with no prior political experience and unclear party affiliations. To balance the ticket, they needed someone with government experience, especially someone palatable to the North. Fillmore, with his clean image, loyalty to the party, and Northern roots, was chosen as Taylor's running mate. The ticket won narrowly, and Millard Fillmore became Vice President of the United States. But Fillmore's role as Vice President was largely ceremonial and limited. President Taylor barely consulted him, and Fillmore spent most of his time presiding over the Senate, where he watched from the sidelines as tensions over slavery reached a boiling point. The issue of whether to allow slavery in new territories acquired after the Mexican-American War threatened to tear the nation apart. Taylor, a Southern slaveholder, surprisingly took a firm stance against the expansion of slavery into new territories, alienating many Southerners. Then, in July 1850, the unexpected happened. President Taylor fell ill after attending 4th of July celebrations and died suddenly. On July 9, 1850, Millard Fillmore became the 13th President of the United States. Overnight, a man who'd been largely relegated to the background was thrust into the most powerful office in the land in a moment of extraordinary national crisis. His presidency began with the Compromise of 1850, a complex and controversial package of bills designed to ease sectional tensions between the North and South. The compromise included admitting California as a free state, establishing territorial governments in Utah and New Mexico, with the question of slavery left to popular sovereignty, ending the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and most divisively, enacting a stricter fugitive slave law. Taylor had opposed many parts of this compromise, but Fillmore embraced it, believing it was the only way to preserve the Union. Fillmore's support for the compromise, especially the Fugitive Slave Act, sparked outrage in the North. The law mandated that runaway slaves be returned to their owners, even if they had reached free states, and required ordinary citizens to assist in their capture. It criminalized any effort to help escapees, and its enforcement was brutal and dehumanizing. Though Fillmore insisted that he was simply upholding the Constitution, his actions alienated many Northern Whigs and abolitionists who had once supported him. Despite the political cost, Fillmore believed the compromise would calm the nation's fever and give it time to heal. In some ways, he was right. The Civil War did not come in 1850. But the compromise, rather than solving the problem, only delayed the inevitable. Slavery remained a festering wound, and the nation remained bitterly divided. Fillmore's attempts at neutrality and moderation were seen by many as weakness, and his administration was marked by increasing isolation. On the foreign policy front, however, Fillmore had more success. He sought to expand American trade, particularly with Asia. In one of the more visionary acts of his presidency, Fillmore dispatched Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan in an effort to open that long isolated country to American commerce. Though the fruits of this mission would not be fully realized until after Fillmore left office, it laid the groundwork for a major expansion of U.S. influence in the Pacific. Domestically, Fillmore also worked to modernize the economy. He supported the building of railroads, canals, and telegraph lines, which were transforming the American landscape. He advocated for sound fiscal policies and vetoed pork barrel spending. He believed in a government that was efficient, restrained, and focused on the common good. But these achievements were overshadowed by the ongoing crisis over slavery. When the 1852 election came, Fillmore hoped to run for a full term. But the Whig Party was deeply fractured. The Northern wing was furious over his support of the Fugitive Slave Act, while Southern Whigs viewed him as only lukewarm in defending their interests. The party ultimately passed him over in favor of General Winfield Scott. Scott lost the election badly, and the Whig Party, already fractured, would soon dissolve altogether. After leaving office, Fillmore returned to Buffalo, but he wasn't done with politics. In 1856, he made a surprise return as the presidential candidate of the Know Nothing Party, officially known as the American Party, a nativist movement that opposed immigration, particularly of Catholics. Fillmore himself was not especially anti-immigrant, but he embraced the party as a vehicle to return to national prominence. He hoped to present himself as a unifying moderate figure in a nation tearing itself apart. The campaign, however, floundered. He won only one state, Maryland, and received a small share of the vote. From that point on, Fillmore faded from the political spotlight, though he remained active in public life. He spoke out in favor of preserving the Union during the early days of the Civil War, but also criticized some of Abraham Lincoln's wartime policies. Though he opposed the expansion of slavery, he also condemned abolitionists for pushing the country toward conflict. His views, increasingly out of step with the moral urgency of the time, cast him as a relic of a bygone era of compromise and cautious gradualism. Millard Fillmore died on March 8, 1874, at the age of 74. In the decades since his death, his legacy has been debated and often dismissed. He is frequently ranked among the lesser presidents, criticized for lacking vision and moral clarity. His support for the Fugitive Slave Act remains a particularly dark stain on his record. And yet, to understand Fillmore is to understand a man caught in the impossible bind of his era, a leader who believed in the Constitution above all, who thought the Union could be preserved through balance and dialogue, even as the forces of history were hurtling toward rupture. He was not a president of grand gestures or soaring rhetoric. He did not seek glory, and he did not wield power with bold strokes. But he was, in his own way, a reflection of the America he served, conflicted, striving, imperfect, and hopeful. He remains a symbol of the limits of compromise and the dangers of trying to appease all sides when the stakes are fundamentally moral. Millard Fillmore's life is a study in contrasts. Born in poverty, rising to the presidency, a man of principle who compromised on slavery, a president largely forgotten, yet pivotal in one of the most consequential decades in American history. While he may never occupy the lofty pantheon of Washington, Lincoln, or Roosevelt, he remains an essential piece of the American puzzle. A reminder that even in times of quiet leadership, history is being written, decisions are being made, and legacies, however complex, are being formed. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, was born on November 23, 1804 in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. The son of Benjamin Pierce, a Revolutionary War hero and two-term governor of New Hampshire, Franklin was raised in a politically active household. He graduated from Bowdoin College in 1824, where he formed a lifelong friendship with author Nathaniel Hawthorne. After studying law, he was admitted to the bar in 1827 and began his practice in Concord, New Hampshire. Pierce's political career commenced early. He was elected to the New Hampshire state legislature in 1829 and became its speaker by 1831. His ascent continued as he served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1833 to 1837 and then in the Senate from 1837 to 1842. A devoted Democrat and supporter of President Andrew Jackson, Pierce earned the nickname Young Hickory, echoing Jackson's moniker, Old Hickory. Despite his rising political profile, Pierce resigned from the Senate in 1842, citing a desire to focus on his legal practice and family life. In 1834, Pierce married Jane Means Appleton, the daughter of a former Bowdoin College president. Jane, a devout and reserved woman, was uncomfortable with Washington's political scene. The couple had 3 sons, but tragically all died young. Their last surviving child, 11-year-old Benjamin, died in a train accident in January 1853, just weeks before Pierce's inauguration. This devastating loss cast a long shadow over Pierce's presidency, with both he and Jane plunged into deep mourning. Pierce's return to national prominence came during the 1852 Democratic National Convention. After a deadlock among leading candidates, Pierce emerged as a compromise choice and secured the nomination on the 49th ballot. He won the presidency by defeating Whig candidate General Winfield. Pierce's support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act proved to be a political disaster. Though he did not author the bill himself, his enthusiastic endorsement gave it the force it needed to pass. The act shattered the fragile peace achieved by the Missouri Compromise and invited violence into the American frontier. Instead of allowing settlers to decide the slavery issue through peaceful democratic means, the region descended into chaos. Pro- and anti-slavery factions flooded into Kansas to sway the outcome by force, and the territory became a battlefield. The phrase "bleeding Kansas" would forever mark Pierce's term with blood. His failure to effectively mediate the crisis revealed a deeper flaw, an inability to lead with moral clarity. He saw slavery as a constitutional issue to be handled through compromise and legality, not as the deep moral wound that it truly was. Pierce's foreign policy achievements, though overshadowed by domestic turmoil, did leave a mark. The Gadsden Purchase secured crucial territory for a southern railroad route and resolved lingering boundary disputes with Mexico. It was a textbook example of peaceful diplomatic acquisition. Similarly, the opening of trade with Japan through Commodore Perry's mission, though begun under Millard Fillmore, reached its conclusion under Pierce's administration and marked a turning point in East-West relations. These successes, however, were not enough to rescue his presidency from the cloud of his domestic failures. Pierce's demeanor was calm, sometimes to a fault. He lacked the fiery passion of an Andrew Jackson or the visionary leadership of an Abraham Lincoln. He led with civility and decorum, believing that unity could be preserved through gentle persuasion and adherence to law. But as tensions heightened, the nation needed a bolder hand. By 1856, even his own party saw him as politically toxic. His failure to calm the sectional conflict led Democrats to replace him with James Buchanan, whose presidency would, in turn, edge the nation closer to civil war. For Pierce, this rejection was deeply wounding, though he remained publicly loyal to his party. After leaving the White House, Pierce lived a relatively quiet life, though not one free of controversy. He openly criticized Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War and voiced opposition to many of the administration's policies, including the suspension of habeas corpus. These statements, paired with his earlier Southern sympathies, led to rumors of disloyalty. Although there was no credible evidence that Pierce supported the Confederacy, the accusations tainted his post-presidential reputation. He also struggled increasingly with alcoholism. Without the responsibilities of public office and burdened by sorrow, Pierce found solace in drink. His final years were spent in solitude, visited occasionally by friends like Nathaniel Hawthorne, who remained loyal to him until the end. One of the more compelling aspects of Pierce's legacy lies in his friendship with Hawthorne. The author, known for his deeply introspective and often somber works, was perhaps the one person who truly understood the depths of Pierce's internal conflict. In his campaign biography of Pierce, Hawthorne portrayed him as a man of integrity and courage, perhaps more as Pierce wished to be than as he truly was. Their friendship was enduring, even as public opinion of Pierce plummeted. After Hawthorne's death in 1864, Pierce arranged and attended the funeral, a rare moment of public vulnerability and devotion from the reclusive former president. In examining Franklin Pierce's life, it becomes clear that he was a man shaped more by circumstance than by vision. His instincts were often correct in matters of legality and process, but he failed to grasp the emotional and ethical shifts reshaping the American consciousness. He was a constitutionalist at a time when moral clarity was required. His faith in the Union was unshaken, but his inability to challenge the moral failings of the status quo rendered him ineffective. His tenure was a study in the limits of moderation, especially during an era demanding decisive action and bold moral leadership. In the years following his death in 1869, Pierce faded into the background of American memory, overshadowed by the looming figures of Lincoln, Davis, and Grant. Yet historians continued to revisit his presidency, not in celebration, but as a cautionary tale. He is often ranked among the worst American presidents, not for corruption or scandal, but for ineffectiveness. His story serves as a reminder that leadership in times of crisis requires more than intellect and civility. It demands vision, moral courage, and the ability to make difficult, often unpopular, decisions. Still, to dismiss Pierce entirely would be to ignore the humanity of his struggle. He was a man who deeply loved his family, grieved profoundly, and tried earnestly to hold a country together using the tools he understood: compromise, law, and dialogue. That those tools proved inadequate is not merely a reflection on Pierce himself, but on the nation that, at that moment in history, stood at a crossroads. He remains a tragic figure in American history, not just a failed president, but a symbol of a country torn between principle and practice, between unity and justice, and ultimately between peace and war. And as we reflect on Franklin Pierce today, more than a century and a half after he led the nation, we do so not only to judge his presidency, but to understand the era that forged him, the decisions that doomed him, and the legacy that he, perhaps unwittingly, helped shape. In every political figure lies a mirror to their times. And in Pierce's story, we find not just the quiet failures of one man, but the turbulent, painful evolution of a nation on the brink of transformation. James Buchanan. James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States, remains one of the most controversial and often criticized figures in American history. Born on April 23, 1791, in Cove Gap, Pennsylvania, Buchanan's journey to the presidency was one shaped by ambition, experience, and a deeply rooted belief in the Constitution. Yet, despite his extensive political background, Buchanan's time in office would be forever marked by his inability to prevent the nation from descending into the bloodiest conflict in American history, the Civil War. Buchanan came from a large family and was the second of 11 children. His father, James Buchanan Sr., was a successful merchant and farmer, providing his children with both economic stability and a strong sense of discipline. James attended Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and although he faced expulsion early in his college career due to unruly behavior, he eventually graduated with honors. He studied law and was admitted to the Pennsylvania bar in 1812, just as the United States was entering into war with Britain. From the beginning, Buchanan was a Federalist, a supporter of a strong national government and a stable, centralized union. Though the Federalist Party was in decline, Buchanan's personal charisma and sharp legal mind allowed him to rise quickly in political ranks. He began his political career in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives before moving on to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives for over a decade. His time in Congress established him as a conservative voice who prized constitutional order and compromise. His ability to navigate political turbulence earned him several high-profile diplomatic assignments, including a key role as the U.S. minister to Russia under President Andrew Jackson. His diplomatic style was polished and courteous, earning him admiration abroad and reinforcing his belief in negotiation and diplomacy over conflict. Buchanan's resume continued to grow. He served as Secretary of State under President James K. Polk, where he helped negotiate the Oregon Treaty with Britain, settling territorial disputes in the Pacific Northwest. He also served as minister to the United Kingdom during the administration of Franklin Pierce, where he was involved in the controversial Austin Manifesto, a document suggesting that the United States should acquire Cuba by force, if necessary. This proposal was met with outrage and further stoked tensions over the expansion of slavery. Despite these controversies, Buchanan remained a respected statesman. His long service in diplomacy and government positioned him as a safe, seasoned candidate for the presidency in the 1856 election. At the age of 65, he was considered the ideal compromise candidate, a Northerner with Southern sympathies, a man with decades of experience, yet no direct involvement in the most heated domestic debates of the day. The Democratic Party nominated him as their presidential candidate, hoping his distance from the divisive Kansas-Nebraska Act would make him palatable to a broad swath of voters. Buchanan's campaign promised peace and stability. He ran against John C. Fremont, the Republican candidate who opposed the spread of slavery, and Millard Fillmore, representing the Know Nothing Party. Buchanan won the election, carrying every slave state except Maryland, and winning enough northern states to secure the presidency. His victory, however, came on the cusp of national disaster. The United States was already in turmoil over the issue of slavery, particularly its expansion into new territories. The country was bitterly divided between North and South, with growing violence in Kansas and heated debates erupting in Congress. Buchanan entered the presidency with an optimistic but naive belief that the constitutional order and judicial decisions could resolve the conflict peacefully. Buchanan's inaugural address made clear his intention to leave the slavery question to the Supreme Court. Just 2 days after his inauguration, the Dred Scott decision was handed down by the court. This decision declared that African Americans could not be citizens of the United States and that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. Buchanan supported the decision and was suspected of having prior knowledge of its contents. Many believed he had influenced the court to render a broad ruling in favor of the South. This destroyed what little trust Northerners had in his neutrality and ignited further outrage in an already volatile political climate. Buchanan's presidency became increasingly defined by inaction, indecisiveness, and an almost obsessive faith in the Constitution as a self-correcting force. He believed that slavery was wrong in the abstract, but also believed that it was protected by the Constitution and should be left to the states. He thought that preserving the Union meant avoiding interference in Southern affairs and refusing to challenge the status quo. This position, while intellectually consistent, failed to recognize the moral urgency of the slavery crisis and the depth of sectional animosity tearing the nation apart. In Kansas, violence erupted between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers, a period known as Bleeding Kansas. Buchanan backed the pro-slavery Lecompton Constitution, a decision that alienated Northern Democrats and strengthened the Republican opposition. His support of the Lecompton Constitution, despite obvious electoral fraud and widespread opposition in Kansas, revealed his growing alignment with Southern interests. Even members of his own party, such as Senator Stephen Douglas, broke with him, arguing that popular sovereignty should decide the fate of Kansas. The split fractured the Democratic Party, which had long been the dominant political force in the country. Meanwhile, Buchanan's administration was plagued by economic turmoil. The Panic of 1857 devastated banks and businesses across the North and the West, leading to widespread unemployment and financial instability. Buchanan responded with his typical laissez-faire attitude, believing that the federal government had no authority to intervene. His refusal to act during the crisis only added to the perception that he was out of touch with the needs of ordinary Americans. His presidency increasingly looked like one mired in denial, retreat, and irrelevance. By the time the election of 1860 approached, the Democratic Party was in ruins, split between Northern and Southern factions. The emergence of Abraham Lincoln as the Republican candidate galvanized opposition to slavery's expansion, and his victory in November of that year pushed Southern states toward secession. As states began to secede, Buchanan found himself paralyzed. He believed that while secession was illegal, he also believed the federal government had no constitutional power to stop it. This bizarre contradiction, acknowledging a national crisis but insisting on constitutional helplessness, was the final mark on Buchanan's troubled presidency. In the final months of his administration, 7 southern states left the Union. Federal arsenals and forts in the South were seized, and Buchanan did little to stop it. He sent supplies to Fort Sumter, but refused to use military force. His passivity gave secessionists time to organize and embolden their resolve. While Buchanan hoped that compromise could still bring the Union back together, the political reality had shifted beyond the realm of negotiation. Buchanan left office in March 1861, handing the reins of a broken nation to Abraham Lincoln. In his final address to Congress, Buchanan insisted that history would vindicate his actions and that he had done everything he could to preserve the Union. But most Americans saw him differently. He was blamed for failing to act, for enabling Southern aggression, and for leaving the country weaker than he had found it. The Civil War began just a month after he left office, and with it came an era that would reshape the American identity forever. In retirement, Buchanan returned to his home, Wheatland, in Pennsylvania, where he wrote a lengthy memoir titled Mr. Buchanan's Administration on the Eve of the Rebellion. In it, he defended his presidency and placed blame for the Civil War squarely on the shoulders of the abolitionists and the Republican Party. He believed that extremism on both sides, not his own inaction, was to blame for the country's descent into chaos. Yet history has not been kind to Buchanan. Most historians rank him as one of the worst presidents in American history, not for any scandal or corruption, but because he failed to meet the moment when leadership was most desperately needed. Still, Buchanan remains a complex figure. He was not a villain in the classical sense, but a man of conviction, whose convictions were tragically mismatched to the times he lived in. His rigid adherence to legalism and his unwillingness to confront the moral dimensions of slavery left him unable to respond to the greatest challenge of his era. His belief in the Constitution was profound, but it blinded him to the fact that documents alone could not preserve a nation without action and principle behind them. James Buchanan was also the only lifelong bachelor to occupy the White House. He lived with his close friend William Rufus King for many years, which has led to considerable speculation among historians and biographers about the nature of their relationship. While there is no definitive evidence, the friendship was deeply significant to Buchanan, and King's death affected him profoundly. His personal life, largely solitary, reflected the same introspective, reserved demeanor that he brought to public life. Buchanan was a man of discipline and propriety, shaped by a sense of decorum that often seemed out of place in a time of upheaval. Despite the failures of his presidency, Buchanan's life is a window into the challenges of leadership during one of the most difficult times in American history. He is a reminder that experience and intelligence are not enough when the moment demands courage and clarity. His presidency teaches us that avoiding conflict is not the same as resolving it, and that neutrality in the face of injustice is itself a form of complicity. James Buchanan did not start the Civil War, but his failure to prevent it, his inability to grasp its causes or confront its consequences, has defined his legacy. And so James Buchanan remains a cautionary tale. A president who hoped to keep the peace by standing still while the nation tore itself apart. He believed in compromise, but not in justice. He believed in union, but not in unity. And in the end, he left behind a country more divided than ever before. His story is not just one of failure, but of missed opportunity. It is the story of how one man's limitations can become a nation's burden, and how history judges not only what leaders do, but what they fail to do when it matters most. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. The very name evokes a sense of gravity, wisdom, and enduring legacy. Born in a log cabin in the woods of Kentucky on February 12, 1809, Lincoln's journey from humble beginnings to the highest office in the land is one of the most compelling tales in American history. He would go on to become the 16th President of the United States, but long before that, he was just a boy growing up on the frontier, experiencing the hardships of pioneer life. Raised in a poor family, Lincoln had very little formal education, yet he possessed a deep and relentless hunger for knowledge. He often walked miles just to borrow a book and would read by firelight late into the night. This passion for learning, combined with his naturally sharp mind, laid the foundation for the thoughtful, articulate leader he would one day become. Lincoln's early life was marked by a series of challenges that would shape his character. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died when he was just 9 years old. Her death left a deep scar on the young boy, but he would later gain a stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, who recognized his intelligence and nurtured his love for reading and learning. Lincoln grew up doing hard labor, splitting rails, plowing fields, and doing all the chores required of life on the frontier. These years of physical toil toughened him and connected him deeply with the working class of America. They were his people, and he never forgot them. As a young man, Lincoln tried his hand at many things. He worked as a store clerk, a rail splitter, a postmaster, and even a surveyor. But it was the law that eventually captured his interest. Self-taught, he borrowed legal books and studied them rigorously, eventually passing the bar exam and becoming a successful lawyer in Illinois. His legal career was marked by a reputation for honesty, which earned him the enduring nickname Honest Abe. He became known for his clarity of thought, his fairness, and his ability to communicate complex ideas with simplicity and sincerity. But Lincoln's ambitions extended beyond the courtroom. Politics called to him, and he entered the Illinois state legislature in the 1830s as a member of the Whig Party. Later, he served a single term in the U.S. House of Representatives, but his political career seemed relatively modest until the issue of slavery began to tear the nation apart. Lincoln had always believed slavery was morally wrong, but like many others of his time, he struggled with how to confront such a deep-rooted institution. The 1850s were a turning point. As the nation debated the expansion of slavery into new territories, Lincoln's voice became more prominent. He rose to national attention during his debates with Stephen A. Douglas, a series of public forums that showcased Lincoln's powerful oratory and unwavering moral stance against slavery's expansion. In 1860, Lincoln was nominated as the Republican candidate for president. His election triggered a seismic reaction. Southern states, fearing that Lincoln would move to abolish slavery, began to secede from the Union. By the time he took office in March 1861, 7 states had already seceded. Lincoln inherited a nation on the brink of civil war. He faced an impossible task, preserving the Union while navigating the volatile political landscape of the time. And then, just weeks into his presidency, the first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter. The Civil War would come to define Lincoln's presidency and his legacy. He approached the conflict not only as a political struggle, but as a profound moral crisis. He saw the Union as a sacred bond that had to be preserved, not simply for the present generation, but for the future of democracy itself. Lincoln was not a military man, but he grew into the role of commander-in-chief with grit and resolve. He agonized over every decision, bore the weight of every casualty, and visited battlefields to meet soldiers and see the cost of war firsthand. Through it all, his speeches and writings carried the soul of a nation struggling with its identity. One of his most significant acts was the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Though it didn't immediately free all slaves, it fundamentally altered the nature of the war. No longer was the fight just about preserving the Union, it was about human freedom. The proclamation declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free, and it paved the way for the eventual abolition of slavery across the country. It also allowed for the enlistment of black soldiers into the Union Army, giving those who had been enslaved a chance to fight for their own liberation. Lincoln's leadership during the war was not always popular. He faced fierce criticism from both political opponents and members of his own party. The war dragged on, and the death toll mounted. Cities burned, families were torn apart, and the very idea of America seemed to hang by a thread. But Lincoln remained steadfast. He often turned to humor to deal with the stress, and those who knew him spoke of his deep melancholy. He carried the pain of the nation within himself, and yet, through his words and his quiet strength, he inspired hope. Perhaps no speech better encapsulates Lincoln's vision than the Gettysburg Address. Delivered in November 1863, on a battlefield soaked with the blood of thousands, Lincoln stood and spoke just 272 words. In those few sentences, he redefined the purpose of the war and reminded the country of its founding ideals. He spoke of a new birth of freedom and government of the people, by the people, for the people. It was a moment of transcendent clarity, one that would echo through time. As the war drew to a close, Lincoln began to look toward healing. He did not seek revenge on the South, but instead offered reconciliation. His second inaugural address, delivered just weeks before his death, was filled with compassion and grace. "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he said, urging the nation to bind up its wounds and move forward together. It was a message not of victory, but of unity, of understanding the deep suffering that had taken place and finding a way to rise above it. And then, just as peace seemed within reach, tragedy struck. On the night of April 14, 1865, while attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. He died the next morning. The news stunned the nation. Bells tolled, cities fell silent, and people wept in the streets. Lincoln had lived long enough to see the end of the war, but not long enough to shape the peace that followed. His death was not only a loss for America, but for the world. He became a martyr for the cause of liberty and union. In the years and decades that followed, Lincoln's legend only grew. He was mourned not just as a president, but as a symbol of integrity, sacrifice, and wisdom. Statues were erected in his honor. His words were etched into monuments and hearts. But beyond the stone and the speeches, Lincoln left behind something more enduring, a vision of what America could be, a place where the promise of equality wasn't just a phrase in a founding document, but a principle worth fighting for. He believed deeply in the potential of democracy, in the capacity for people to govern themselves wisely and justly. What made Lincoln truly extraordinary was not just the fact that he led during a time of war, but how he led. He was not a man of wealth, or privilege. He had no powerful family connections. What he had was empathy, humility, and a profound understanding of human nature. He listened. He reflected. He changed his mind when persuaded by reason. He was fallible, and he knew it. But he always aimed to do what was right, not just what was politically expedient. His moral compass did not waver, even when it cost him popularity or placed him at odds with powerful figures. Lincoln's life teaches us that greatness often comes not from personal ambition, but from rising to meet the moment, from choosing courage over comfort, conviction over convenience. In times of crisis, when the fabric of a nation is stretched to its limits, we look to leaders like Lincoln not just for answers, but for hope. He reminds us that leadership is not about command. It's about service. It's about carrying the burdens of others, speaking truth with humility, and standing firm even when the ground beneath you shakes. More than a century and a half after his death, Lincoln's relevance has not dimmed. His speeches are still studied. His legacy is still debated. And his life continues to inspire new generations who seek to understand what it means to lead with conscience. He remains a benchmark against which presidents are measured, and a reminder that character matters. Abraham Lincoln was not perfect. He was a man shaped by his times with flaws and contradictions. But what set him apart was his capacity to grow, to listen, and to strive for a higher moral purpose. He dreamed of a country where liberty and justice were not privileges for the few, but guarantees for all. In that dream, he gave his life. And in his death, he became more than a man. He became an idea that continues to live in the hearts of those who believe in freedom, equality, and the enduring promise of democracy. So when we speak of Abraham Lincoln, we speak not just of history, but of legacy, of how one man, born into obscurity, rose through perseverance and principle to become the conscience of a nation. We speak of the power of words to change hearts, of the weight of decisions that alter the course of history, and of the enduring belief that one person, guided by truth, can indeed make a difference. That is the story of Abraham Lincoln. A story not just of the past, but a story that continues to guide our future. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, was a man whose life and political career were marked by contradictions, resilience, and controversy. Born into poverty on December 29, 1808, in Raleigh, North Carolina, Johnson's early life was one of hardship. His father, Jacob Johnson, worked as a porter and died when Andrew was just 3 years old, leaving the family destitute. His mother, Mary McDonough Johnson, took in work as a spinner and weaver to support her family. At the age of 14, Andrew was apprenticed to a tailor, a trade that would become both his livelihood and a stepping stone into politics. Despite having no formal education, Johnson taught himself to read and write with the help of his wife, Eliza McCardle, whom he married in 1827. Eliza played a significant role in his self-education, reading to him and assisting in his learning. Johnson's tailor shop in Greenville, Tennessee, became a hub for political discussion, and his oratory skills and advocacy for the common man propelled him into public office. He served as an alderman, mayor, state legislator, congressman, governor of Tennessee, and U.S. senator, aligning himself with the Democratic Party and championing the rights of poor white farmers. Johnson's political career was characterized by his staunch support for states' rights and his opposition to the interests of the wealthy elite. During the Civil War, he was the only Southern senator to remain loyal to the Union, a stance that earned him national recognition and the vice presidency under Abraham Lincoln in 1864. Following Lincoln's assassination in April 1865, Johnson ascended to the presidency during a critical juncture in American history. As president, Johnson faced the monumental task of Reconstruction, the process of reintegrating the Southern states into the Union and determining the status of the newly freed African Americans. Johnson's approach to Reconstruction was lenient toward the former Confederate states. He offered blanket pardons to most former Confederates and allowed Southern states to establish their own governments, many of which enacted black codes that severely restricted the rights of African Americans. Johnson's policies were met with fierce opposition from the radical Republicans in Congress, who sought to implement more stringent measures to protect the rights of freedmen and ensure a more equitable society. The conflict between Johnson and Congress intensified as he vetoed key legislation aimed at advancing civil rights, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the extension of the Freedmen's Bureau. Congress overrode his vetoes, marking a significant shift in the balance of power between the legislative and executive branches. Johnson's opposition to the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to African Americans, further alienated him from Congress. In an attempt to rally public support for his policies, Johnson embarked on a speaking tour known as the Swing Around the Circle, which was widely criticized for its confrontational tone and did little to improve his standing. The breaking point came with Johnson's violation of the Tenure of Office Act, a law designed to restrict the president's power to remove certain office holders without the Senate's approval. In February 1868, Johnson dismissed Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a staunch supporter of congressional Reconstruction, and appointed Lorenzo Thomas as his replacement. This action led the House of Representatives to impeach Johnson, making him the first U.S. president to face such charges. The Senate trial that followed was a national spectacle with tickets to the proceedings in high demand. Johnson was ultimately acquitted by a single vote, narrowly avoiding removal from office. The impeachment trial underscored the deep divisions within the government and the nation during Reconstruction. After his presidency, Johnson returned to Tennessee, where he remained politically active. In 1875, he achieved a political comeback by being elected to the U.S. Senate, becoming the only former president to serve in the Senate. However, his return to national politics was short-lived, as he died later that year on July 31st. Johnson's legacy is complex and often viewed negatively due to his opposition to civil rights advancements and his leniency toward the former Confederacy. Historians have criticized his failure to support measures that would have provided greater protections for African Americans during Reconstruction. His presidency is frequently cited as a cautionary tale of how personal biases and political miscalculations can hinder progress during pivotal moments in history. Despite his controversial tenure, Johnson's life story remains a testament to the possibilities of self-made success in America. From humble beginnings, he rose to the highest office in the land, driven by determination and a belief in his principles. His presidency serves as a reminder of the challenges inherent in uniting a divided nation and the importance of leadership that seeks to heal rather than exacerbate divisions. As history continues to evaluate his impact, Andrew Johnson remains a figure emblematic of the tumultuous era in which he lived and governed. Andrew Johnson's presidency was also marked by his deep-rooted sense of personal conviction, which often placed him at odds with his contemporaries. He was a man of stark contrasts. On one hand, a champion for the common man, and on the other, a staunch opponent to the advancements of civil rights for African Americans. His beliefs and decisions were often driven by his background as a poor white Southerner who resented the power of the planter elite and the aristocracy of the South. At the same time, his resentment toward Northern Republicans, whom he saw as too radical and too eager to impose their own vision of Reconstruction, led him to take a more conservative approach, one that was seen as lenient to the former Confederates and unforgiving toward those who had fought for the Union during the war. While Johnson was determined to reunite the nation following the Civil War, his vision of what that reconciliation should look like was far removed from the more inclusive, radical proposals of his opponents in Congress. He believed in a swift restoration of the Southern states without requiring significant guarantees for the civil rights of the newly freed African Americans. In his view, the Southern states had never truly left the Union. They had simply been in rebellion. For Johnson, the road to healing was paved by reestablishing the Southern states as quickly as possible, allowing them to reinstitute local control and restore order in the wake of the war. However, his view ignored the profound changes needed in the South to secure freedom and equality for African Americans. The years following the Civil War were deeply contentious in terms of how the Southern states should be reintegrated into the Union. Johnson's policies reflected a desire to return to pre-war conditions, except without slavery. He allowed Southern states to reestablish governments that, in many cases, quickly passed laws known as Black Codes, which restricted the rights of African Americans and essentially perpetuated a system of racial segregation. These laws were a direct response to the newfound freedom of Black Americans and sought to limit their ability to live freely and equally in society. As these laws spread across the South, they highlighted the inadequacy of Johnson's Reconstruction policies and demonstrated the deep divides between him and the radical Republicans who sought more significant social and political changes. In his attempt to regain favor with the South and reduce the political power of the federal government in the states, Johnson also found himself clashing with Congress over important civil rights legislation. One of the most contentious moments of his presidency was his veto of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was designed to secure citizenship and equal protection under the law for African Americans. Johnson argued that the bill was unconstitutional and would undermine the authority of the states. However, Congress overrode his veto, marking one of the first significant challenges to his leadership. This act signaled the growing power of Congress and its shift away from Johnson's vision of a more lenient Reconstruction. It also demonstrated the growing resolve of the radical Republicans who would go on to push for the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection for all born or naturalized in the United States, including African Americans. Johnson's vetoes, combined with his refusal to cooperate with Congress, led to his increasing isolation. His relationship with the legislative branch soured even further when he opposed the 15th Amendment, which sought to protect the voting rights of African American men. By this point, Johnson was seen as an obstacle to the very changes that many saw as necessary to truly rebuild the nation after the Civil War. As Congress enacted reforms to establish greater rights for freedmen and secure the future of the Union, Johnson's resistance increasingly appeared to be an attempt to return the nation to a pre-war status quo, a vision that left African Americans without the full protections of citizenship. The culmination of the ongoing political battle between Johnson and Congress came in 1868 with his impeachment. The Tenure of Office Act, passed by Congress to prevent the president from removing key officials without Senate approval, provided the legal grounds for Johnson's impeachment. Johnson's decision to remove Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and replace him with Lorenzo Thomas was seen as a direct violation of the law, and the House of Representatives moved to impeach him. The impeachment proceedings were heated, and the nation watched closely as the trial unfolded in the Senate. While Johnson was ultimately acquitted by a single vote, his fate in the hands of moderate Republicans, his presidency was severely damaged. The impeachment trial itself marked a dramatic point in the nation's history, as it demonstrated the growing power of the legislative branch and the increasing willingness of Congress to challenge presidential authority. Despite surviving impeachment, Johnson's political career was effectively over. His presidency had become a symbol of the divisions within the country and the inability of his leadership to bring about meaningful change. His loss of popularity and influence among both Republicans and Democrats left him a deeply isolated figure by the end of his term. However, Johnson's story did not end with his presidency. He returned to Tennessee and attempted a political comeback by running for the U.S. Senate in 1875. To the surprise of many, Johnson was elected to the Senate, making him the only former president to return to the Senate. Unfortunately, his return to politics was short-lived, as he passed away later that year, closing a tumultuous chapter in American history. Johnson's legacy is one of profound complexity. While his rise to the presidency from humble beginnings is a testament to the possibility of self-made success, his time in office remains controversial. His commitment to reuniting the nation and his focus on a quick reconciliation of the South left much to be desired, particularly in terms of securing the rights and freedom of African Americans. His reluctance to support civil rights legislation and his opposition to Reconstruction reforms positioned him as a leader whose actions often failed to match the demands of the time. Critics argue that his policies perpetuated inequality and allowed racial discrimination to continue in the South, ultimately prolonging the struggles of African Americans for many decades. Despite his controversial legacy, Johnson's presidency offers valuable lessons on the challenges of leadership during a time of national crisis. His resistance to radical change and his belief in a return to old norms illustrates the difficulty of navigating a nation recovering from a war as devastating as the Civil War. Johnson's tenure reminds us of the deep divisions that can exist within a country, even after the cessation of hostilities, and how those divisions can shape the trajectory of a nation for generations. As historians continue to study Johnson's time in office, his presidency remains an important chapter in understanding the complexities of American Reconstruction and the difficult path to a truly united nation. As a man, Andrew Johnson was a product of his time, rooted in the values of his Southern upbringing, yet navigating the tumultuous waters of a country struggling to define its future in the aftermath of civil war. His life story reflects the broader themes of ambition, conflict, and the painful consequences of unresolved division. Though his presidency is often viewed unfavorably, his journey from poor tailor to the highest office in the land is a testament to the often unpredictable course of American history and the complexities of leadership during one of the nation's most trying periods. Andrew Johnson's legacy is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and that even the most controversial figures can provide insight into the challenges of governance and the evolution of American democracy. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was one of the most consequential figures in American history, a man whose actions shaped the course of the nation during some of its most turbulent years. Born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27, 1822, in Point Pleasant, Ohio, he would later become one of the most prominent military leaders during the American Civil War and serve as the 18th President of the United States. Grant's early life didn't foreshadow the greatness that he would eventually achieve. His family was of modest means, and he was not particularly driven in his early years. But the experiences that shaped him would push him toward a career in the military, a path that would ultimately lead to his legendary status. Grant's first significant experience with the military came when he was appointed to the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1839. Despite his lack of enthusiasm for the academy, Grant graduated in 1843, ranked 21st in his class of 39. He was then commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army and sent to serve in the Mexican-American War, a conflict that would prove to be a formative experience in his military career. During the war, Grant served under General Zachary Taylor and General Winfield Scott, gaining valuable experience in the art of warfare. His performance in battle earned him a reputation for bravery and steady leadership, though it would be years before his true potential as a military leader would come into full view. After the Mexican-American War, Grant's military career stagnated. He struggled with the routine life of a peacetime officer, and he faced personal difficulties, including alcohol-related problems that almost ended his career. Grant resigned from the Army in 1854, returning to civilian life in Missouri. He tried his hand at farming, but the venture was unsuccessful. He then worked in a variety of jobs, including as a clerk in his father's tannery, but nothing seemed to fulfill him or provide the kind of success he desired. In many ways, this period of his life was marked by a sense of aimlessness, but it was also a time of growth and reflection. He would later refer to this period as one in which he learned to be a man. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 would alter the course of Grant's life forever. The war created an opportunity for him to return to military service, and he quickly ascended through the ranks. Grant's early experiences with the military had shown him that success was not always about grand strategies or flashy moves. It was about persistence, discipline, and a refusal to give up. These qualities would become his hallmark as he quickly established himself as a capable and determined leader. In 1862, Grant achieved his first major success in the Civil War with the capture of Fort Donelson in Tennessee. It was here that Grant famously demanded the surrender of the Confederate forces, saying, "No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move immediately upon your works." This victory earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrender Grant, and it catapulted him into the national spotlight. The capture of Fort Donelson was a significant turning point, as it opened up the Mississippi River to Union forces and gave Grant the reputation of a man who could get things done. Grant's greatest test came in 1863 during the Battle of Vicksburg, a campaign that would solidify his reputation as one of the greatest military leaders in American history. Vicksburg was one of the last Confederate strongholds along the Mississippi River, and its capture was essential to splitting the Confederacy in two. Grant's ability to adapt, his patience in the face of prolonged siege warfare, and his ability to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy led to a stunning victory for the Union. After more than a month of intense fighting and a series of successful maneuvers, Grant's forces finally forced the Confederate garrison to surrender on July 4, 1863. The fall of Vicksburg, combined with the Union victory at Gettysburg just days earlier, marked a turning point in the war. The Confederacy was now on the defensive, and Grant's place in history as a military genius was assured. Grant's success at Vicksburg, along with his earlier victories, caught the attention of President Abraham Lincoln, who promoted him to the rank of lieutenant general in 1864, making him the first man to hold the rank since George Washington. This promotion made Grant the overall commander of all Union forces, and he immediately began to make his mark as a leader who would do whatever it took to bring the war to a close. His strategy was simple but effective. Apply constant pressure on the Confederate forces, never give them a chance to regroup, and keep up the fight until the enemy could no longer sustain itself. Grant's relentless pursuit of General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia would eventually bring the Confederacy to its knees. Grant's campaigns in 1864 and 1865 were characterized by brutal, unrelenting warfare. He engaged Lee's forces in a series of bloody battles, including the Overland Campaign, the Siege of Petersburg, and the Battle of Appomattox. Though the fighting was fierce and costly for both sides, Grant's persistence and his ability to keep his forces supplied and moving ultimately wore down the Confederate army. Lee's army, stretched thin and facing overwhelming odds, was forced to surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, effectively bringing an end to the Civil War. Grant's generosity and magnanimity in victory were remarkable. He allowed Lee and his troops to return home with their horses and sidearms, signaling his desire for reconciliation rather than retribution. After the war, Grant's fame reached new heights, and he became a national hero. His role in preserving the Union and his decisive leadership during the war earned him the admiration of many, and in 1868 he was elected the 18th President of the United States. His presidency, however, would prove to be far more challenging. While his military prowess had been undeniable, the complexities of governing a nation in the aftermath of the Civil War were far more difficult. Grant faced immense challenges, including the need to reconcile the North and South, rebuild the economy, and protect the newly freed African American population. He sought to implement Reconstruction policies that would guarantee civil rights for freed slaves, but his administration was plagued by corruption scandals, which undermined his effectiveness and tarnished his legacy. Grant's second term as president was marked by increasing political instability and economic challenges. While he remained committed to civil rights and fought to protect African Americans from violence and discrimination, his efforts were often thwarted by a hostile Congress and by the growing influence of white supremacist groups in the South. His administration was also marked by a series of financial scandals, most notably the Whiskey Ring scandal, in which government officials were found to have been involved in a tax fraud scheme. These scandals, combined with Grant's inability to effectively address the economic panic of 1873, led to a loss of political support and public confidence in his leadership. Despite these challenges, Grant remained a man of character, committed to his principles and to the idea of a united nation. After leaving the presidency in 1877, he retired to a quiet life with his family. But his financial troubles would soon lead him to financial ruin. In 1884, he invested in a business venture that ultimately failed, and he was left with little money. In his final years, Grant sought to restore his fortunes by writing his memoirs. The work, completed with the help of his close friend, Mark Twain, would become one of the most celebrated autobiographies in American literature. The personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant was published in 1885 and was an immediate success, earning Grant enough money to provide for his family after his death. Grant passed away on July 23, 1885, at the age of 63. His death marked the end of a remarkable life, one that had been defined by perseverance, courage, and an unwavering commitment to his country. Today, Ulysses S. Grant is remembered as one of the greatest military leaders in American history. His role in the Civil War, his presidency, and his contributions to the preservation of the Union remain central to the story of the United States. While his presidency may not have been without its flaws, Grant's legacy as a general and his steadfast commitment to the cause of liberty and justice continue to inspire future generations. His journey from a troubled young man to one of the most revered figures in American history serves as a testament to the power of perseverance, character, and duty. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th President of the United States, led the nation through a turbulent period following the Civil War and the Reconstruction era. Born on October 4, 1822, in Delaware, Ohio, Hayes was the son of Rutherford Hayes, a successful businessman, and Sophia Burchard Hayes. Tragically, his father died before he was born, and Rutherford B. Hayes was raised by his mother, a strong and determined woman who ensured that he received a solid education. His early years were shaped by his mother's values of hard work, self-discipline, and public service. Hayes would later recall her as a significant influence on his life. Hayes was a bright student, excelling in school, which led him to attend Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. After graduating in 1842, he went on to study law at Harvard Law School, where he graduated in 1845. Upon returning to Ohio, Hayes quickly established a successful law practice. However, his desire to serve the public soon led him to enter politics. In 1858, Hayes was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Republican, marking the beginning of his political career. During his time in Congress, Hayes was known for his commitment to the Union cause, especially as tensions between the North and South escalated. He was a staunch abolitionist, advocating for the end of slavery and supporting the policies of President Abraham Lincoln. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out, Hayes, like many of his contemporaries, felt a deep sense of duty to serve his country. He enlisted as a lieutenant in the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry and was eventually promoted to the rank of major. Hayes fought in several key battles, including the battles of South Mountain and Antietam, where he distinguished himself as a capable and courageous officer. However, his most significant contribution came in the aftermath of the war, when he served as a leader in the rebuilding of the South during the Reconstruction period. After the war, Hayes returned to Ohio and was elected governor in 1867. His tenure as governor was marked by his focus on civil rights and the protection of African Americans in the South. He worked to ensure that the rights of freedmen were upheld and fought against discriminatory laws and practices. His stance on these issues made him a progressive figure, but it also earned him criticism from more conservative factions of his party. Despite the challenges, Hayes was re-elected to a second term in 1875, solidifying his reputation as a principled and determined leader. Hayes's presidential campaign in 1876 was one of the most contentious and closely watched in American history. The election was fraught with controversy, primarily due to the results in the South. The contested states of Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina had both Republican and Democratic electors claiming victory. As the election was unresolved, the nation faced a potential crisis. A special electoral commission was created to determine the legitimate electoral votes, and in a dramatic conclusion, Hayes was declared the winner by a single electoral vote. The outcome of the 1876 election sparked widespread debate, with many questioning the legitimacy of Hayes's victory. His opponents believed that the election was stolen, leading to deep divisions within the country. However, Hayes, aware of the political climate, quickly set to work healing the wounds of the nation. One of his first acts as president was to negotiate the Compromise of 1877, a deal that effectively ended Reconstruction. In exchange for the Democrats accepting his victory, Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, thereby allowing Southern states to govern themselves once more. The withdrawal of federal troops marked the end of the Reconstruction era, a period that had seen significant, though often controversial, efforts to integrate former slaves into society. The compromise effectively gave the South the freedom to enforce discriminatory laws, leading to the rise of Jim Crow laws and the disenfranchisement of African Americans for decades to come. This was a contentious decision, and Hayes himself was conflicted about it. He believed that the withdrawal of troops was necessary for national reconciliation, but he also understood the negative consequences it would have on the rights of African Americans in the South. As president, Hayes worked to restore public confidence in the federal government, which had been tarnished by the corruption scandals of the Grant administration. One of his key initiatives was civil service reform. Hayes believed that the spoils system, which rewarded political patronage and loyalty rather than merit, was a source of corruption and inefficiency. He sought to reform this system by advocating for a merit-based approach to government hiring. In 1877, he signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which established the foundation for the modern civil service system. This landmark legislation helped to reduce political patronage and made government jobs more accessible to qualified individuals. Despite his efforts to reform government and address the challenges of Reconstruction, Hayes faced significant opposition from both political parties. His presidency was often marked by gridlock, as his efforts to pass legislation were stymied by a divided Congress. He also faced criticism for his handling of the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, which was one of the largest labor uprisings in American history. The strike, which began in West Virginia and spread across the nation, was a response to wage cuts and poor working conditions in the railroad industry. Hayes responded to the strike by sending federal troops to break the strike, a decision that was met with both support and outrage. While Hayes believed that the use of force was necessary to maintain order, the incident highlighted the growing tensions between labor and capital in the United States. In the final years of his presidency, Hayes continued to focus on issues of civil service reform, education, and foreign policy. He made several appointments to the federal courts and worked to improve relations with Latin American countries through diplomatic efforts. Despite his accomplishments, Hayes struggled with public perception. His presidency was overshadowed by the controversial election and the ongoing struggles of Reconstruction, and he did not seek re-election in 1880. After leaving office, Hayes returned to Ohio, where he remained active in public life. He became a staunch advocate for education and philanthropy, founding a number of schools and institutions. Hayes was also a vocal proponent of civil rights, speaking out against the disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South. His post-presidential years were marked by his efforts to continue the work of Reconstruction in a private capacity, as he sought to address the social and political challenges facing the nation. Rutherford B. Hayes passed away on January 17, 1893, at the age of 70. Despite the controversies that marked his presidency, Hayes left a lasting legacy as a man of principle and conviction. His commitment to civil service reform, education, and national reconciliation helped shape the future of the United States. Hayes's time in office remains a reminder of the complexities and challenges of leading a nation through a period of great upheaval and change. His presidency may not have been defined by sweeping accomplishments, but his efforts to heal the nation and restore faith in government were significant in their own right. Today, Hayes is remembered as a man who sought to balance the demands of justice, political compromise, and national unity during one of the most challenging periods in American history.